District Board of Education, and we're meeting at the Grandview Technology Center here in Provo, Utah. We will begin with a roll call. I'm Melanie Paul, Board President.
I'm Rebecca Nielsen, Board Vice President.
Gina Hill, Board Member.
Terry McCabe, Board Member.
Kay Jensen, Board Member.
Jennifer Kaiser, Board Member.
Nate Bryson, Board Member.
Keith Patel, Superintendent.
We need to have everybody else.
Sure.
Kathy Bryant, Business Administrator.
Elizabeth Hanson, Marketing Specialist.
Caleb Price, Communications. Chad Duncan, IT. Jason Cox, Human Resources.
Anna Harrison, Teaching and Learning.
Todd McKee, Secretary Ed.
Bonnie Hotchkiss, Executive Assistant.
Dr. Payne, Student Services.
Alex Judd, Elementary Ed.
And the search.
Mark Wheeler, Director of Facilities.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Is there a motion to the study session?
So moved.
Okay, I'm going to, do you want to start with Keith, or do you want me to just have Mark start?
Let me take care of a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, temperatures in here. This facility is old, and we, other than kind of dressing it up, which happened prior to my arrival, we haven't really invested a lot in this particular building, except just to keep it running. So if you get hot or if you get cold, there's really no gradation in between that. It's either on or off. So that'll be a bit of a challenge, but certainly with Mark here, we can make sure that we're comfortable over it as much as we can be.
Or at least complain to somebody.
Yeah, you can fire your complaint. And then restrooms are out there, and if you want anything other than bottled water, there's a water dispenser and filter out in the hallway. So I think that's about it. And Bonnie, thank you for the breakfast and treats. So Mark, you want to talk to us?
Sure. You want to display the FY22?
Which one do you want?
It's the fiscal year 22.
Category.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, everybody. As always, if you have questions, please let me know. I'll just highlight a couple of things unless you ask me specifics about certain things you see on here. This is the proposed budget for fiscal year 22, which will begin this July 1. We've got one thing I want to the first thing I want to point out. We have three different budget areas that we apply things to. The first list are capital improvements, smaller type projects. You can scroll down, Keith, you can see you've got building reserve as a second category, which we rarely touch. As you know, we're using some of that right now to get started with the first steps at Contingency, which will be reimbursed by the bond eventually. And then the third budget area is building improvements, which we set aside larger budget items as needed, and we try to use that as little as possible as well. Stephanie, is there anything you want to add about those three budget areas?
No.
Before I go on?
That's pretty clear.
Okay. All right. While you're here at the bottom of this page, Keith, you can see some of these larger, we've also got, for some reason that didn't show up there, but that should say 28 million. For TIPU phase 1 for fiscal year 22, there it is. It's approximately 28 million just for fiscal year 22 of the 80 million. So that's what that represents, that first full year of that project. The other projects you see under building improvements, we've got to change out grind out and change out the flooring in the restrooms at Timpanogos. What was selected originally in 2007 is not very helpful for cleaning, and so we're finally taking a step to get rid of that. What you see now at Timpanogos, it's equivalent of what you see on the side of a swimming pool surface. It's just really rough surface. We've got to get that out and put something more user-friendly and more cleanable in those restrooms. Westridge, restroom renovations. We just received the bids yesterday on that. Our low bid right now is about $480,000, and then you add some other things on top of that, design fees, but we'll end up being lower than that. And that'll take place this summer.
How many restrooms at Westridge?
All of them.
How many is that?
I can't remember the total number, but all the student restrooms, the child nutrition restroom, the faculty restroom, they'll all be fixtures, new tile. That's what will be happening there this summer. Centennial, we finished this past year, phase 1 of HVAC improvements. And I think Stephanie noted for you recently, phase 1 was a great step because now we can get heat or cooling from the main source to the opposite end of Centennial within a couple of minutes, where it used to take us a couple of hours. And so it's much more energy efficient now, and this phase 2 is just another step to improve the mechanical system in that building. So that's one that we're working with engineers currently. Centennial is just a re-roof on certain areas that have reached their lifespan. Amelia is reached its lifespan on a re-roof need. Lakeview, what that means by North Face waterproof. Since that school was built, whenever it rains or storms, if the wind blows in the, whether you call it the right direction or wrong direction, they get rain and moisture through the walls of the classrooms along the north face. And so we're finally taking a step to solve that, to get that fixed. And then that's just a design fee category that takes care of us for all the small projects in the category above that we anticipate for the upcoming year. Whether it's engineering, from civil engineering, mechanical engineering, architectural services, that's what that last line item represents. Any questions on those before I go to the top? Okay, you scroll up, Keith. Yep. One thing I want to point out first, superintendent's contingency. We set aside about $80,000 a year. At times there's projects that come up that Keith will ask us to focus on, look at. And a specific example that helped us with this past week, we had a couple of what's called makeup air units over the Tim View shops fell. And so we had set aside money from last year and this year, which we were able to use to help us take care of those because we didn't have a line item to budget for those items.
I'm sorry, this is what you said fell? What fell?
They fell. They're makeup air units, exhaust fans and makeup air units, and they're over the metal shop and the auto shop at Tim View High School. And so without those, you don't have the right circulation, uptake of air that you need to get out of those spaces.
Is that the same area that there was the fire a couple years ago?
Same area.
So
Yeah.
we're fixing a lot of that?
Yeah, so these units weren't impacted by the fire, but it's the same area. Yeah. So anyway, that's an example of how that contingency helps us at times. If you see anything that says exterior masonry cleaning and reseal, you've seen the mineralization taking place on the exterior of Chromebook Peaks, for example. It's not as severe as Centennial, but it's time to reseal that masonry to Centennial, Amelia, and Spring Creek. And so that's what, we go there, we clean it, we point up some areas that have some voids now, and we reseal that. And you have to have a certain temperature, so we have to do that during the summer. So that's what those line items represent. Chromebook Peaks is on that list for sure. Backup generator installation that you see under Independence. In addition to our newest buildings, we are also moving soon with new backup generators for Westridge and Canyon Crest. Independence will be next. And what that means is we now have the newest setups with these backup systems, not only to cover emergency lighting, but it also helps us back up technology's equipment in case of power outages, as well as walk-in coolers for child nutrition. And so we're trying to get all those updated, just school by school as we can.
Mark, can you clarify on new buildings?
Is that just part of the plan now? All new buildings have a backup generator?
All new buildings is just part of the project. Right. So we're going back to our older schools that haven't had that opportunity to try to upgrade those.
Great.
Yeah. Anything you want to add on that, Brad?
No, but it's been really important where so much is running off the network now, and these network devices have to be powered by access control in this building, security cameras, all the stuff that, I mean, we have to maintain the phone systems, for example, all that needs to stay up in the power hours, so the generator has been a huge help.
Thank you. One other item for technology in general, coordination with technology, is campus security improvements. We've started to set aside a lump sum every year. And what that represents is we get requests for additional cameras or additional things with secured entrances, things like that. it helps us cover those as those come up throughout the school year. And we have had several requests for this coming year from multiple schools for additional security cameras.
Yeah, let me just add to that. I don't know that all board members are aware, but last year we ran a major security audit throughout the district. We contracted with a group out of Los Angeles. This was all paid for by one of the grants we received. And they had a number of things. So some of what Mark was describing here are requests that have come out of that security audit as well. So it will be, we can't solve all of the issues that were identified in one year, but we can pick away at them.
Yeah, good, thank you. And just, yes,
Can you talk about the 10-year re-roof due to the system failure at Provo Peaks?
yes, thank you. That's where I was gonna go next.
Sorry to jump the gun.
No, thank you for bringing that up. So as we speak right now, we have a roofing consultant over at Provo Peaks right now, meeting with Steve Canfield and a couple of others. Unfortunately, when Provo Peaks was originally designed and built, a roof system, when I say roof system, I mean the membrane system, they opted for a very inexpensive roof membrane system. This summer will be 10 years for Provo Peaks, and it's already been failing over the past year. So we made a decision to take a step to get a good 30 to 40-year membrane system on that school for the bulk of its remaining lifetime. So that's what it represents.
So it's not a function of it was badly constructed, it's just a function of we chose a cheap option.
It was the cheapest option, and unfortunately, we got what we paid for.
Right.
We've been dealing with increasing leaks over the past 12 months at Provo Peaks.
Provo Peaks was built on a bond that was funded by the federal government at the time. It was part of the stimulus package when President Obama came in, and there were certain rules, and one of the benefits was to not spend as much, to kind of do it, for lack of a better term, a little bit on the cheap. So those decisions were made, and now we're having to deal with that.
So that'll happen sometime this summer. We're getting some new information, and we'll get the right system. So we've got the right membrane system on that building. Any other questions about any of these other line items before we get?
Can you talk about the plans for the cafeteria at Centennial?
Yes, so what we're looking at for Centennial, as you've seen with the enrollment, we're over 1,200 students this year at Centennial, and it's been over 1,000 for several years. That cafeteria was never designed for that many students. My guess when that school was built in 1996, it was probably 850-ish, is my best guess on that enrollment. And in addition to capacity, you all know what that cafeteria looks like. You walk in there, it's got the step-down kiva type setup. It is not a user-friendly cafeteria. So we're going to ask an architect to help us look at the best way to create space efficiency in there, get rid of that kiva type setup, and maybe even bump it out slightly to the south, just for greater capacity for occupancy. So we'll design it this coming year, and then the work will take place summer of '23 is when that'll happen.
Can you help me with two things? When you say roof membranes, I have zero idea what that means. What does that mean? Is that like the structure, the bones of it?
So the membrane system is what covers the structure.
Okay,
It's the weather protection,
okay,
right, that covers the structure.
okay, that makes more sense to me, thank you.
Yeah,
And construction done. Also, the kiva setup, is that like a bowl? Is that what
Yeah.
you're trying to describe?
it's a
like
step down,
Step down, okay,
yeah,
excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
Just wanted clarification.
It looks cool.
yeah, looks cool, just, not for a cafeteria. So, yeah,
Great for, reality.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Any other questions on these proposed projects?
So we're just paying for all this stuff out of capital reserve?
Yeah, annual capital improvement budget,
Okay.
right?
So we will be drawing down our capital reserves?
No.
This doesn't,
Not from building reserve.
This is his regular budget that
Okay.
he gets every year, with the exception of the building reserve pieces, if we do any of that.
okay.
Right,
And we try and stay about at 2.5 is what we try and stay, and so we're just slightly over, but
we're slightly over for this coming year, right? And again, what this represents, we get input from all the schools each year. They send it to us by November 30th, because it takes us a few months to go through all the estimating. And so we take and assess the most urgent of the most urgent requests and then consolidate it into this. And so there's a lot of things that get requested by schools that you don't see here, but we take care of at times, little by little, out of this $500,000 budget, this contingency.
So after we use a little bit extra from this, and after we pay back the money we borrowed from the builder reserve for TIPU, how much will we have in that reserve?
So we haven't actually, because we haven't closed the year yet, we're booking the expenses for TIPU, but because we haven't actually closed the year, we haven't drawn down any fund balance yet. They're just sitting out there as expenses. So
Okay.
we'll get the bond funds, and once we have the bond funds, we'll shift those TIPU expenses over to those accounts. The building reserve's at 18.7 million. Because we haven't closed the year, we
Okay.
haven't drawn anything down, it will stay at 18.7.
Okay.
And then his regular capital, I have some notes on my presentation in budgeting, but his regular capital, we are drawing down about 4 million this year. He's got about 13 million in there now, so that'll drop down to about 9.
Okay.
His regular capital fund balance. The 4 or 5 million that he brings to you each year is his regular operating that he operates with that annual revenue.
That's part of the 10 million that's in his budget? or
That's
whatever?
part of his annual revenue. So we get about 5 million, 6
Okay.
million in capital revenue every year from the capital levy that covers these annual expenses.
Okay.
So we'll only draw down when he needs to do more than we've got coming in for that current year. Like we're doing this year. We're drawing it down a
We're
little.
drawing down like 300,000.
Yep.
Yes.
And, sorry, one more. What percentage does a district usually keep in another building? You know, that fund, that $18 million fund?
You know, Nate, it just depends on what we're doing. There's been years where we haven't had any in building reserve because, for example, when we built Provo Peaks, we had built up building reserve in anticipation of, we had to match that bond,
Yeah.
that qualified bond. So we had 6 million in the bond, 6 million we had to match. We pulled that out of building reserve at the time, which pretty much wiped it out. And then we made a commitment to try to put in a couple million a year just to build it in the event of having some funds for building part of a school or et cetera. So we've made a pretty good commitment to put money into that and for the last year or so, and that 18 million's just been sitting there.
It
Part of
gives
this
us that
conversation is going
flexibility.
to be, what should we be doing with that 18 million? We could drop down to 0 and we'll be okay. Capital funds, you really want to keep at least probably 6 million in there for emergency use.
I mean, it's been great having because we're like, okay, we can deal with these problems as they come. We're not in too dire straits.
And we, if you remember right, a year ago or 2 years ago when the 14 bond didn't pass, 18 bond didn't pass, we put a big chunk into building reserves because we were concerned we might have to spend 20 million on TIPU just to shore it up if the bond didn't pass.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why building reserve is high right now, because we were anticipating using it for TIPU, and then if TIPU passed, the other 2 schools. So.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
And so you'll see a list like this pretty much every year, not the same projects, of course. One year, what was it, Kenny, Chris, there was a huge gap in the parking lot up front, and to prevent it from sliding down the hill, we had to all of a sudden step in there and do that.
Yeah.
So,
Any other questions on this? Yes.
Can I just hear really, you just a quick summary of the Timpanogos playground? That's I'm into that school, I just want to be aware of what's happening.
So what we're doing at Timpanogos, we're adding a 3rd playground for Timpanogos. Whether it'll be on the west side or how we place that, with their students, you know, they just got the one playground basically on the north side. So we're trying to add an additional, and we're trying to make it ADA compliant. There's several playground projects that we have listed for the next couple of years that we're trying to create ADA access to these playgrounds and some type of equipment within that new space that's ADA approved.
But it hasn't been chosen where it'll be yet.
Right, right, we haven't designated.
So does this mean that the floor isn't going to be wood chips, it's going to be rubber?
Yes. Yep, in this new pit, if it's ADA approved, yes. That's correct.
Thank you.
What is it, can't fix, for instance, Christmas?
Chad can tell us on that.
I mean,
We've been trying trying to set aside a little bit each year.
Yeah, the main work that needs to be done there, we have bridge work. I mean, a lot of those bridges, we have to cover in plywood because they've broken through the things. We have cement work at a shed that's up there, because we do a lot of forklift and the stuff on the trucks to get it down to camp. So it's improvements like that, shed, bridges, the platforms, we have platforms for the big army tents to sit on them, with that type of work. So that's mostly what we're talking about. It won't cover everything, but it'll get us where.
So you do little maintenance every year. Okay.
Any other questions? So before we talk about Wasatch and Dixon, if you can scroll down just slightly, Keith. This building reserve, you'll notice we've carried over, just in case we go that direction, a re-roof budget for both of those schools, and we added 8% from the last time you saw that budget. What we're seeing with the construction market, the 8% escalation, annual escalation is a safe number right now. It depends in the trade, which is higher, but overall, there's an average about 8% that we still continue to see. So that may or may not be used depending on your direction, on what direction you want to go with those two campuses. And then this one for the GLC, this is a restroom addition that we're going to design and plan to help for the GLC building here on this campus. With all the professional development meetings and the high number of training we have up here with the occupancy, we have to get better ADA restrooms on this campus. We've been non-compliant for a lot of years, and so that's what that 500,000 represents. Yes.
I still struggle with $500,000 for a restroom.
Well, it's not just a single, it's multiple stalls. It's like it's the way it should have been 25 years ago for the way that building's used. And so you'll have ADA access plus multiple stalls, men's, women's restrooms. So.
Is that there or here?
That's in the other building across this way. It'll be attached to the west side.
It's off of the carpeted gym area, and it's pretty primitive.
It's really bad, and it does seem high. One of the challenges you have when you change out plumbing, it's not only what you see, it's what you don't see. So you gotta go back behind the walls and change things out. And even the fixtures in restrooms, for commercial restroom work, you're about $800 per fixture. So when I say fixture, sink, toilet, urinals, it adds up really quick as restroom space is expensive space.
Is it requiring an addition to the building?
Correct. So right now, if you're walking east and you're looking at the west side of the GLC, it'll be bumped out from that west side, where there's glass right now, where that one hallway is. That's where we'll place it. We're placing it there because of coordination with existing sewer lines coming in from the city system.
That makes more sense to me than if you have to actually add on space.
Correct. Yeah, so it's structure and interior space. Yes.
So I have a question with the 8% escalation. I know that's just an estimate, right? Perhaps it might be up. Did Timpview I wasn't on the board for the Timpview, but didn't it come in under the cost that we're looking at now is cheaper than the original the 2019 bond? It seems to me like Timpview actually de-escalated. I don't know where it is.
So Timpview is at phase one, $80 million. That includes all our soft costs. Design fees, furnishings, that's everything. We will know exactly where we're at with the bulk of the project this May when we officially bid out the three-story academic wing.
I think what Gina's talking about is, remember when we did bids for the first stage, when we did the demolition, the bids came in a little bit less than we expected.
They will get more permanent.
Oh, for the South Gym portion?
Yeah.
Yeah,
We had more people bid on it than we were expecting, and they were a little bit lower.
Correct. Yeah, that portion, yes. And because of some adjustments we were able to make along the way, right now we're about $6 million for that first step, and I think we'd estimated about $9 million for that first step. And so we've started out in a good direction with that.
You may be aware that another district not far away from us didn't plan for a particular kind of escalation, and as a result had a bond problem. There were a number of issues with that, but this, you're right, it may not ultimately turn out to be a full 8%, but given what that's happening in the market, it's wise for us to at least
Just plan for it,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
And we
We're
don't have
we're
to
always trying to
spend
project
all.
a year down the road.
Yeah, I mean, that's Mark's, that's what you guys did for how you came in under, where everyone else comes in over. So we make our citizens pay this first, and then I guess later.
Not even say, worry about it first.
Yeah.
You make them worry about it.
Yeah.
They don't even pay- they don't
And then we
even
never
pay
get the
for
credit
program.
once it comes in under budget.
Yeah, it's, as you see with market conditions, the growth in Utah continues to drive this construction market. And trade by trade, since November to October, we continue to get notices of increases. From concrete to steel to roofing, it's been really volatile.
And labor will continue, so, if the legislature goes through with their bond of $2 billion of capital, that means $2 billion of construction projects that will happen over the next 2 years, that will take labor, that will take, that will drive all those costs.
Yeah.
And all the projects I'm doing in my own job, the prices are through the roof. Through the roof.
Yeah,
Yeah.
lumber's been one of the worst.
500,000 sounds expensive for you, like a bathroom, but 150 sounds expensive for my kitchen. I'm like, what do you do? What? Like,
Yeah.
my wife wants to redo the kitchen. I'm like, well, this is not the whole house. Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yes.
So, I'm kind of construction dumb, like Rebecca said. Can you explain a difference between the full re-roof that we're talking about for Provo Peaks versus what we would be doing at Wasatch and Dixon? Because there's a huge cost difference.
Yes, so Provo Peaks, for example, it is the membrane only, right? We're taking out the existing felt membrane system, we're putting on a new felt, a new system, so it's just all new weatherproofing, waterproofing. Wasatch and Dixon, there's some connection points involved, which make it very difficult at those two old buildings. And the connection points from the new system, from critical points from the roof structure to the walls, has to happen for the re-roof to take place. And then when I say that, it's not a seismic upgrade. It's just what has to happen with those old buildings.
So what you're saying is that at Provo Peaks, those connections are okay? You
Yeah.
just have to replace them.
How it's built is
Like the
okay.
beginning, like
We're just
Yeah, the-
replacing some of the materials.
The roof diaphragm is good at these newer buildings, and so we don't have to worry about that. These older buildings, we're adding some new weight to these buildings, we have to make some adjustments to accommodate that.
Okay.
Okay, do you want to go to the Wasatch Dixon file, Keith?
Okay, I'll find it here and open it up.
So if Keith brings that up, what I'm just sharing here is just a refresher of where we were at, and where we're at now with Wasatch and Dixon. So this represents going back to a building evaluation in 2011 at Wasatch, 2012 for Dixon. And just kind of remind where we're at and what we're dealing with these locations. And in the end, we're looking for direction of what steps you want to take with these two campuses, so we know how to plan and how to manage maintenance needs for these two campuses moving forward. So starting with Wasatch, the 2011 structural rating was a 2, and you can see it's 100% of the building. I visited with the engineer this past week, structural engineer who performed that evaluation for us in 2011, and he said you're easily at a 1 now. And again, that's 100% of the building. And the word he used to describe Wasatch is brittle. There is no flex whatsoever from wall to roof systems at the Wasatch campus. So that's where we're at with the structural rating. Even on the next slide.
But that's not official, right? That's just an estimate?
No, that's official.
It's official, so he's actually come in and re-evaluated.
That is based on a conversation looking at the 2011 data this past week. I don't have a new written report. He did say this to me. He said, I'm being nice when I'm saying a 1 for the Wasatch building. but he has not put that in writing for us, like he did a full evaluation. And then this is just a reminder of the age of the building. The green area is 1949, which includes back to the kindergarten rooms. The 1953 edition, which is this reddish area, brownish area, 1953. And the media center wing was added on 1989. That's just a reminder of where we're at with the age of Wasatch. Can you scroll to the next one, Keith? So over the next 10 years, what these numbers represent, it's what we should do to take care of this building over the next 10 years. And you can see that the $18 to $20 million range for a 10-year estimate to improve that Wasatch building. That does not include a full seismic upgrade. It's not possible to do a full seismic upgrade on that old structure. It's impossible to do that, which is why it needs to be rebuilt. The rebuild estimate, we've added 8% again. If we were going to start spring of 2022, it'd be about $32 million, including that 8% escalation factor. And again, that doesn't include any land purchases that we've got to coordinate if we stay on the existing site between the city and BYU. That's in addition to that.
That's $2.5 million more than what we estimated in our last bond.
Correct. Yep, and that's that 8% factor that keeps hitting everyone year by year. Yeah.
Do we have, monitors on the building?
No.
Check, okay, I couldn't remember if we did.
No, there's no. And we know what we have with Wasatch, and so if we were to put monitors on there, the monitors help us with building settlement. They don't help us with seismic.
And I remember around the time of the 2019 bond, the custodian had reported like new signs of like bricks falling off on the outside and things like that. Have we seen much more of that?
No,
Okay.
no. And that was one area on the east side,
Okay.
just outside the kindergarten rooms. And some of that has to do with the age of the masonry. Yes.
Is there a way you could get us a line item about what the 18 to 20 million would cover? Like what we would want to use that 18 to 20 million for? I mean, it's just a big number.
It's mechanical, electrical, plumbing, it's a complete infrastructure, it's architectural facelifts, millwork, carpet, painting, it's basically everything.
Except for seismic.
What's that?
Except for
seismic.
seismic.
Yeah. So yeah, and that's a good thing to bring up. Anything that we put into Dixon or Wasatch right now does not solve the seismic problem at either location.
And that also doesn't get all the students under one roof.
Correct. Yeah, so this build, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. We have half the enrollment over in the two-story Oak Ridge buildings, which seismically is okay. It was built in the early 80s. But you're right, you've got your enrollment in two different buildings at Wasatch.
Mark, what's the status? Can you help me remember what the status is with that piece of property and BYU? I can't remember. We're leasing or will you remind me?
With Wasatch too.
With Wasatch.
Yeah, with Wasatch too. So,
We own the building,
We own the building, they own the property.
yeah,
And our
we
lease
lease
is
their
up?
land with our building sitting on their land.
And
I
our
believe
lease
we still have about 38 years on that lease.
38.
I believe.
Oh, so we're good on our lease time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct. And that brings us to this new layout. If this stays on this existing campus, there's a lot happening here with different property owners. Right now, our existing property line is right here, right on the east side, and it follows straight north up on the east side of the Oak Ridge building. So everything from this line over, this square, for example, when I say we, internally, we've talked about talking to the city to where maybe we swap this square of land for this 3 acres that we own here, where we agreed to let the city bring their storm retention basin several years ago. It's on Wasatch property. So this concept is assuming some things that we still need to negotiate and visit with other entities about. So that's one land portion that we need to work out, because you can see it goes into the city park. and we'd have to relocate their tennis courts and pay for that as part of the project. This portion from this line over, this upper triangle,
You know, buying a park just goes really easy.
Yeah.
I don't even want to go there.
But I did want to ask, has it even been approached or even like at all with the city or no?
there were conversations in 2019, and then when the bond didn't pass, nothing's happened since then. So we'd have to start over to see what would work with, between BYU, between the city, to make this concept work.
And in those initial conversations for the last bond, was it a favorable response from the city?
They were open to talking about selling this upper triangle so that we could have a new access off of Birch.
Okay.
But we did not get into this portion here, swapping this square with this 3-acre square here.
But they'll lose their retention pond if they don't want to, because if they don't want to swap that with us, we gotta flip that school to a north-south, and they're gonna lose their retention pond, which could cost them a lot of money.
Correct. It's their advantage to protect this storm, because it's a regional detention system. It benefits the entire east side around there, so.
They have another group that is always in their ear saying, you have another option. Play hardball with the city. It's just, between the city and BYU, it's just, because the other group wants something else, and the city goes, how do we make everybody happy? They're reluctant to talk to anybody, so it's just an awful situation. And the building, so with the lease has some value, too. I mean, so as far as buy the land but as time goes by, there's only 15 years left on the lease, and less value.
So at one point, we had received kind of a conceptual, I wouldn't even call it a proposal, it was just a kind of a collection of ideas about possibly a three-way arrangement between us and the city of BYU. That never really went anywhere because we were waiting for the bond to pass, but it did not. There was not much more to talk about. I actually have a meeting with the mayor coming up here next week, and I sent her a text yesterday, so I'll probably introduce some concepts about, you know, what kind of land arrangement. Certainly we need to have another conversation about that triangle-shaped piece up in the upper right-hand corner.
Hey,
So,
Mark, I went for a walk with my daughter yesterday. There's what suspiciously looks like a well house right here. What's that little building?
There is something there that the city owns. I'm not exactly sure if it's operational or what it represents.
Okay.
So that's something else that we have to work out. I just don't know what it represents.
Sounding so familiar.
Are you
Yeah.
having flashbacks?
Starting to get all the same.
But by the way, this concept is a result of a lot of input, even from community council, Wasatch and others in that neighborhood, wanting the entrance to come off of Birch instead of 900 East.
So this is what half the community wants, because they hate these student apartments looking, I mean, when Mark had this drawn and there was an elementary playground here, they're like, it's next to these creeper students, we don't want that, and they were really angry about that, and really angry about the park.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And I've shared this before, that any input I've ever received from Wasatch Community Council, there's a few things that are always at the top of the list. We don't want to be next to student housing. We don't want to be next to an open park. We want to be fully fenced, and so this concept, you're still next to student housing for the next 65 years. You're still next to an open park for the next 65 years. And this new access off of Birch isn't the best road to have that type of heavy traffic, and it'll really increase the traffic load along Birch. One other component that, one second, I'll catch your question. Part of BYU's input was with this lease that we've had here since early, whenever that started. They wanted to trade that, a portion of that property with some type of cash value for this 900 East frontage. So this dashed line here would be our official property. This would be BYU parking for what they're doing across the street, but they would give us access forever for what we need off 900 East to the school. This Wasatch campus is by far our most awkward property boundary site that we have. It's a result of decades and decades of handshake agreements. And now we're just trying to figure out the best way to clean it up.
Plus, we're even, what was it, and I'm trying to remember what I talked about 3 weeks ago, that there's some question about the actual size of our property,
Correct.
our portion of that.
The county records, we discovered just recently are wrong. It showed more acres than what we really have. So instead of having about 12.3 acres, we have about 10.3 acres.
So it's a really tight site,
Yeah,
and awkward.
it is. Yes.
Okay, two quick things. We do still, regardless of this setup, if we were forced to, we have the option of doing the north-south, right? We can fit it if we need to.
You can fit it, but what you'll see is what McKay explained. The other concept, it has a school going back this way.
Behind the apartment.
So you've got play space and the portion of the school behind student housing
Right.
along the south end.
Okay, and then what's driving, is it the community that's driving the idea they don't want to be next to a park and don't want to be next, okay, because Lakeview's next to a park and Westridge is next to a park and most of our schools are next to a park, so why?
Most
Why is that-
most districts look for an opportunity to share green space with the city.
Right, so what's the problem?
It's a bit different park.
The problem here is with so many students, there's constantly walking traffic during the school day across the campus from east to west to BYU.
But didn't we put fencing in?
We put some of the fencing in, but we couldn't continue because it was crossing so many boundaries. We couldn't get the permission of the other entities to put the fencing on their property. And so that's why we stopped where we stopped. Right now, we just have fencing along this portion here, and then it stops here and it's open, and we added a little bit up here, but
Several
How
years
much
ago,
Does that deter it?
several years ago, before the 2014 bond, we heard from a handful of Wasatch residents in a board meeting that spoke to us about that they were worried about vagrants and other people who are hanging out in the park during the daytime, and they would like some separation. We've gone as far as we can on that right now. I would assume this project, Mark, would come with a fully fenced property.
yeah, once we make property boundaries.
That's the
Well,
report.
it's
I have not seen any, but I don't live over there, so I don't know.
There's more over in my neighborhood, there probably is.
I was just gonna, okay, I don't understand the big,
But that was the concern at the time, and several people spoke to it, and they all claimed that there were people who were hanging out in the restrooms and other places. It's just what we heard, I don't know.
so how much has it deterred, the fencing that's been put in, how much has it deterred traffic?
I've never heard any, honestly, I don't think it's deterred at all. I think if we were to continue with our existing layout, my guess is the students would jump the fence anyway and just take the shortcut anyway to campus. Yes.
There's no other options though, right? Like, it's this or the north-south, that's it, right?
Correct.
There's one more.
Oh,
There's one more.
there is a different option, on a different site, yes, about 3 blocks east, there's a different option.
Who wants to move
And
the school?
and it's one we've studied since what's that?
Depends on how you measure it.
Yeah, so it's 3 to 4 blocks or whatever.
2 blocks.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's right to the east, it's owned by the LDS Church, BYU.
Give me a moment, I'll pull it up on my, I've got Google Maps here.
So there's no hassle, I'm not as familiar with the
No,
area. It's nothing there.
it's just a big empty vacant lot
Up
that
the hill, right?
BYU's owned, yeah. And so
And that's
part,
big enough to build school on,
it's big enough to build a school.
but it's very expensive.
We couldn't get the appraised values to close the financial gap that we looked at previously with the LDS Church at BYU. And so that was some of the hesitation, because on top of the difference, the financial gap in property values, we would also have to do, in today's numbers, probably $4 to $5 million in site prep before we pour footings.
So it'll be more expensive to do that.
So it's a little more expensive to do that, but you're surrounded by houses for the next 60 to 70 years, and you're off of 900 East.
Is our site, it's not more valuable than that other site?
It's not because it's zoned public facilities.
Public facilities.
That's the problem.
Okay.
So they can only appraise by current zoning.
So could,
So the city's not,
that's so annoying. So,
yes.
so would the city work with us to change the zoning?
Only if we make, the only way we could change the zoning would be if we spent the money all on our own, bought the other one, vacated it, leveled it, and said, we're applying for rezoning, and rephrase it, and then sell it.
Isn't BYU, I mean, they're a private entity, why do they have to do it according to the appraised values?
Because every real estate decision they do, it goes before several committees, and if the recommendation from that appraised value doesn't match, it doesn't go past that.
Even if they know the reason why the value is so low, it's because it's appraised as public property?
So there was, I mean, it got within an hour in Provo High. So they went above appraisal value at Provo High because they made that decision.
Yeah, because
But all the way up, it was no, and it had to get elevated to the right level, and it was literally, I mean, not even an hour. We had people in the building to sign another deal.
I mean, that property up there is almost worthless to BYU.
Yes.
It's so far from their campus. That one is worth so much more to them because it's part of their campus.
Yes.
I don't see how it doesn't go to the level where someone who can make the decision can do it on real values, not fake values of based on. And I guess this is a discussion for once we pass a bond.
Correct.
I think that will be an option and that they'd be willing to pay because
But that's
we will
why
never be able to use that.
That's why we couldn't close the gap last time, because they weren't willing to pay. We made that argument and they didn't want to.
And now we have another headwind in that they spent $25 million on a piece of property that they still really don't know what they're doing.
So Mark, you said Birch is not a great street for the added traffic, but if we were to move back to Locust Lane, everybody who's coming for the Chinese immersion that doesn't live in the neighborhood is gonna come up 820 north. That doesn't seem much better as a street, is it?
820 north is much better for
Okay.
traffic loads than Birch.
Isn't there a street light on 900 east and 820 north?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a streetlight,
Yeah.
remember there's an apartment complex, there's
Yeah.
a low-income apartment complex, so it has traffic. There's some other
Where's the street light
complexities
first
on
to
this too. Mark, I don't need to do it, but you can see next to the Locust Lane property, just to the west, there's a square there. Now, we really haven't pursued seriously a transaction with BYU yet. We've talked about a number of general things. They would like us to buy that too. That's 3 acres. It's across the road, and the terrain change there is probably at least 75 to 100 feet. So it's not really functional for us. Plus, as you go down to, and I'll see if I can get it here, cursor down in this area,
This corner.
they had talked about something like that is happening there too. So they had property here for us to look at, maybe it was here. No, it's right there.
It's right.
It was there, and then of course here. And so we really don't know what they want from us. We know that they know what we want from them, and they've said no so far, so I'm not gonna hold my breath. It will cost us more to go to Locust Lane. That's the bottom line.
But anyway, that's
But
it in
it's
the
not
rock.
level, it's not
It's
level.
got a
That's correct. In
big
fact,
hill.
Mark, I meant to ask you this question. Is it likely that the soil conditions in the property on Locust Lane are similar to that at Timpview, and we will have to use helical piers up there?
No, it's not collapsible soils. We've done a soils report already on this a couple of years ago.
Okay.
It's the grades that's the expense of the initial prep.
But that whole property is
It
about
slopes
12 and a
much
half
from year to
acres.
year. What's that?
That whole property is about 12 and a half acres, and the design that you had looked at about maybe 8, 9 years ago, we were gonna get about 10 and change of buildable space out of it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. The school would be placed somewhere in this area, green space going back here to the slopes, and then all the parent traffic and visitor parking right here off Locust Lane on from about this side down.
is there when you include the lease land?
I can't remember the acreage on these two pieces.
No, I mean on the
So what we currently have?
Yeah, you said we
We
owned
have
that.
overage too if we bought that land.
We have about 10.3 plus whatever that small space is under the Oak Ridge building.
Okay.
I can't remember what that is.
Probably an acre.
Yeah. Maybe 11 acres
And
total.
if you can see where the cursor is, this is the property owned by the city that they're okay with having a conversation with us about
It's the
selling it to us.
Are-
Because it's just kind of an oddball thing for them, and it would actually be more beneficial to us in a lot of ways.
The other challenge with this birch lane access on that upper triangle, there's slope there. And there's only so much you can do to terrace it when you're trying to create a driveway for parking for cars. The way I would see it, we would end up probably something similar to the old Rock Canyon campus. If you remember the old campus, you drove down in, and every winter it was tough for people to get out the other end. They had to go back up a slope. I'm a little worried about that birch lane access for the next 60 plus years.
Yeah, there's a slope problem too.
Yeah,
Birch Lane is 20 feet above
that is.
so,
Yeah,
Birch Lane is 20 feet higher than the school.
correct,
So,
correct. Yes.
Sorry, keep going back to the other one. Just to clarify, I know it will cost more to move it there, and I'm not saying we should, I'm just trying to get it straight in my head. If we did build it there and paid a little more money, would that be more sustainable, like in the long run? Is that a better option because it's our property, we're not gonna have to fight with all the, like, is it, like when we pitch it to the public, should we be saying, look, it's gonna cost a little more, but in the long term, it'll save us money, or it'll be a better property? Do we even know that?
We eliminate the awkwardness of what we have now. The entire site is ours. We're surrounded by residential, and we're off of 900 East.
But the challenge is it depends who you talk to, because one of the things that half the residents in the Wasatch area argue for is having it so close to BYU, they can tap into BYU faculty, BYU students, etc. for resources that just have to cross the street. And going all the way up there, and especially on a snowy day of some kind, that might be a deterrent. At least we've heard that from a number of Wasatch residents. It's hard to know for sure what's going to happen, but that is one benefit of being where it is.
And some of them have expressed just they like having a buffer that BYU can't keep coming into their neighborhood with more facilities.
So it's the give and the take, and you have
Yeah.
half, just like with Dixon.
Yeah.
but it's half. So but it's just like Dixon. But they are concerned about access because they view being able to walk over here to the Museum of Art. Not every elementary school gets to do that, but I mean, to me, that would be the value of saying, well, okay, I just want some stairs because you have the church parking lot, we're back on the Wasatch campus. If that was one thing about it, but they just see this as an automatic. They don't get actually any more volunteers than Timpanogos anymore. They used to, but they don't. But it's access to, let's go over to the Fine Arts Center, or the museum. Let's walk over these different things. They'll also talk about, because it's hypothetical, they'll talk about, no, this is traffic. They say there's already traffic on Birch, but there's not. So there's high density housing here. And so this road it's ready for traffic. I don't know if it would actually increase. Remember, we don't run buses. Wasatch has one bus because every kid walks. There's only one bus for Wasatch Elementary. Every other kid walks from those same neighborhoods. So,
If you were to keep this campus, and this is an option we looked at, but we went away from because here's the challenge. The best place to rebuild this building would be somewhere right here where the existing building sits, the best thing would do is to find a place for a year for these students, which I don't know how we would do that. And rework the entrances off 900 East, but that would be the challenge. Where do you send all these kids for a year in the faculty? But honestly, that, if you're gonna stay on the site, that would be the best thing to do with building placement.
Isn't the new UVX station going to be near there as well?
Yeah, and I can't remember if it's slightly north or slightly south.
Yeah, the
I'm not
creamery.
sure.
Yes, so if you just scroll down, so Birch Lane, where that terminates. Yeah, so
Yeah, there's the
but they're gonna put it here. They're gonna put it, I mean, they'll put it right here. They won't do it on this intersection. They're committed to this building, for their students. I mean, this is their counseling, you know, some of their counseling and church family services. And so they've made some recent renovations to that building. Remember, the music building is now here, in front of the law school. So this is, you know, that UVX stop is gonna come down here.
Okay, that new music building, does that have a concert hall in it?
It does.
Yeah.
Okay, so that'll be a parking issue in that entire region, right?
That's why they want that frontage.
They want the front, yeah, they won't, yeah, because this parking lot is colored.
Okay.
I am questioning the 1,000 capacity school.
So,
I ran the numbers, and we have been declining as a school district for the last 5 years. We don't even come close to what Bonneville is projecting. We're not even coming close. We're actually down almost 500 in this district. That's a whole elementary. And we're saying, let's increase capacity. I even looked at Wasatch. Wasatch for the last 5 years has been declining.
By design.
What does that mean by
It's been
design?
designed to be below 1,000.
the
Yeah.
board had charged Gary Wilson Student Services to put together a reduction plan. The school had been growing beyond, without any limits on it at all. So the concern
Because of
was,
the
it was not only really big, but there was no plan to control the size. And so it has been decreasing. Generally before this year, it's been around 750, 780 in that range. Has it not, Jason? Jason laughed at the right time. So, go ahead.
So, and Melanie, to answer your question too, what that concept is based on right now, that's based on the last 12 months of programming conversations that our architects had with faculty and Wasatch administration on how they use the building and the spaces. And,
I just still struggle to see putting in a bigger school that I don't see, when I see the entire east side, we're all decreasing. I mean, there's only been, I think it was Provost and, I don't remember which other one, the slight increases. But as a district overall, we are decreasing. This is something we've got to look at as far as capital needs. And are we going to really, you know, put $40 million into a 1,000 capacity school that maybe we're not, I'm wondering if, you know, waiting a couple years to see where our actual numbers are at before we make this final decision. This is, I really worry about this because the housing everybody knows, in my area, in McKay's area, I don't know about Jennifer's and Nate's, but housing is just exploding. It's super expensive and families are not moving in, at least in my area. So I worry about making this decision, you know, based on what's going on right now, but I'm seeing for the last 5 years, we're seeing a decline. Plus this year, we had another huge decline. I get it, that was the COVID year, we're being held harmless for that, but
For now.
but we don't know how many we're gonna recruit back from that either. So it just makes it difficult to make a decision on 1,000 plus, you know, 1,000 person school. I would be more, and I would rather entertain something that's more set aside like Rock Canyon or something like that.
Yeah,
With the option to expand if needed.
and based on input, we can work with architects and adjust this however, we can adjust the program however we need. I'll give you an example. Washington School District, for example, when they build a new elementary school, they do not go in and ask for the 12 months of input. They say 55,000 square feet and 2 portables for a capacity of 750. That's how they do every elementary school. and other districts are similar in that approach. So a lot of times when we ask for the 12 months of input, group by group by group by group, it grows.
Right, but if we're starting to see a whole bunch of enrollment coming out from all the other schools, I mean, we have a whole elementary amount of kids in the last 5 years that are missing. And we're seeing decline in all of them. I mean, you can look at Franklin. They're under 400 kids, those Canyon Crest. I mean, these are tiny. What do we do? When do we have to have the conversation of closing schools? And going to that, we can't afford the FTEs at all these different schools with those low numbers.
Even our provost is an example, we're about 68,000 square feet for about 400 students. And
So Mark and Stephanie and I met yesterday and tried to talk through just how this might go today and how we would be better prepared for this discussion. We're not seeking from the board, I mean, this is a study session, so we're not asking for a decision today. I do think that it would be helpful for the board to give some thought to what is the right size for this school, and there might be an input process, I don't know, but as we talked it through, we might be 2 years, even if we were to start aggressively going after a land purchase, land acquisition right now and other activities, we think that this might be as much as certainly 1 year away, possibly 2 years away before we can actually start a project. So all we're doing is saying, give us some guidance as to what your thoughts are, and then let's put together a plan for coming back with some decisions on a timeline. But I mean, if for example, we go with one of these plans, we have major land acquisition discussions to have with whoever the entity is. And that's probably the place that we start. The size of the school, I think we can hammer that out within the next 6 to 10 months.
Or 2 to 3 years.
Or 2, yeah. But I would say we're at least 2 years away from even being able to turn dirt. So Mark might think that we could maybe go a little faster than that, and we might, but we don't know how long it'll take to work out details. Remember how long it took to finalize the Provo High School deal. So.
yeah, we can adjust whatever your direction is, we'll adjust the size, the capacity. This is just where we ended with program.
I would like to know an updated opinion of the neighborhood. What do they want? Because how long has it been since you asked them?
A year.
It hasn't been that long yet.
And they're like 50-50.
It was, so then we're gonna be opening up a huge can if we offer the option to move. I mean, it's just, we know how that goes, so.
Well, and it's subject to, I mean, that discussion is entirely subject to another entity.
Right.
Right? So it may be a moot discussion at that point if they want to move, because if, I mean, let's say 60% of them come out and say they want to move up to Locust Lane, but we can't acquire it for a decent price. But one of the thoughts that I've had, and I shared with a couple of board members already, is maybe we could engage the community in a meeting or two, have the architects come and talk about the pros and cons of each site. We could do that, just to get their feedback and input. That wouldn't be a difficult thing to do. But then the question is, when we do that and they don't get what they want because some other thing has thwarted it, then, then we look like, people will accuse us of you're not listening or you didn't do what we wanted. So that's the danger we have right now.
Well, our first decision is, when are we gonna address rebuilding Wasatch? And then I think we go from there, and I would lean between those, I mean, ask our experts, where would you put a school and for what reasons, and weigh that heavily more than those of us who don't have the knowledge of the building and what's going to work for 60 years and things like that.
Yeah, let me know, I'm happy to bring them into a study session or how you'd like to address that. And then we can address all these different options. One thing, and I'll say the same for Dixon, one thing to be mindful of, you'll notice on that proposed capital improvement list we reviewed earlier, I don't have anything listed for Dixon or Wasatch. Right now our plan is, if the system fails, whenever that is, we'll take it out of building reserve. Because we don't know how to guess which system will fail when. And so that's our plan right now for those two buildings. We're trying to be very, very careful about what we invest in two buildings that will be demolished at some point.
Right, and we'd like to not put in putting $2 or $3 or $4 million into something that's going to be torn down in X number of years.
Right.
But you do have the roofing projects on that list, so
I do, and it's
is
in
that
building
something,
reserve.
are the roofing projects something that we absolutely would go forward with?
I mean, the roofing project's almost 10% of the cost of the building.
Right.
Right.
And so,
I mean, when you say you'll wait until things fail, the roofs have already failed and those have to be done.
The roof systems are in bad shape, and we continue to do our best to patch
On both?
on both schools.
Mark, looking at the time, I mean, for my needs for this discussion today, I feel like I've accomplished it. We've presented you the information and kind of laid out what we would have to get going with. It's my belief that we should start inquiring about land acquisition. Do you agree with that? For this property, whether it's talking to all the entities involved to explore the Locust Lane option, and so that would mean we would meet with BYU and also meeting with the city about purchasing that triangle-shaped property, just to know what our options are.
And remember the park.
Right.
Or the retention pond.
All of those things, right.
Yeah, I mean, you've gotta start to know what's even possible.
So I think that if we don't get going on something like that, then it only delays this project further, and as we heard, and I didn't like that word that I saw, the word brittle, that makes me a little nervous, and that's almost sounding like Mark now. But I feel like I've got what I need from this. If you would like, if you're supporting the idea of continuing to look into this.
are we willing to pay the extra in-site prep cost for the other site? I mean, are we willing to pay $5 million in cement?
I wouldn't even guess that it will be as low as $5 million. It was $5 million 8 years ago. So it could be more than that.
We're already looking at probably close to $40 million for an elementary school. It's super expensive. And that's why I would suggest, like, with the declining enrollment based, and I know you're saying but we have declining enrollment otherwise. We've got, this is something that's a district-wide problem. This isn't just Wasatch's problem. This is something that's happening across the city that we've got to look at as far as capital needs are going. Do we really need to put 1,000 capacity school in there? Do we have the capacity for all the other elementaries around? I mean, I'm just throwing out ideas. It's not going to be popular, but a boundary change. I know.
Well, the census results might be coming out soon, and that might affect boundaries.
So,
I mean, Canyon Crest could use extra.
Canyon Crest, you use extra, you know, when we go really long term, I still think that, you know, to avoid all these real estate problems in the future, you know, we're gonna have 10th through 12th in the high schools, 8th and 9th in our middle schools, and 1 through 7 in our elementary schools.
So let me do this.
I don't know how you're going to do 1 through 7 in an elementary school because you've got secondary school teachers in an elementary school at the same time.
We'll need about a month to do this, but
States around us do that all the time.
why don't we pull together for the board for a discussion either at the end of March or sometime in April. We can pull together 10 years worth of enrollments at all our schools here, and then that will give you a fuller picture on
And
that.
capacities at all the different schools
Correct.
and all the.
And will you take into effect the construction that's about to happen? Because
Yeah.
in my area, we're about to get a whole bunch of houses.
Well, that's, maybe, I don't know. Sometimes we're
Because
not
I've been
told
watching
that.
planning commission meetings.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
maybe board members, as you're in touch with what's going on in your own neighborhoods, you can bring that context to it as well. Because sometimes we're not told. So, anyway, we can bring that in. I'm just concerned about the Dixon discussion as well. It's not to shortchange Wasatch, because I think we're all nervous about
Go
that.
to Dixon.
I think, you know, let's continue this discussion about Wasatch, but if you could also bring in maybe how much less it would cost to build a smaller school. Is it easier to build a smaller school on the site? I'm just saying, like, I just still question the idea of being such a big school.
Okay,
Looks
could
like about
you put those in writing and email them to me, and we'll get those addressed? We'll be ready to talk about that.
Yeah.
So So we decided we're going to pursue the property conversation.
Well, we're at
correct?
least gonna have some conversations. We're not gonna get a lot done in a month, but we can go and inquire and find out who's interested in what. If BYU says no, 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 then I think there's only one side.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, with Dixon, again, just to remind you where we've been, this is the 2012 structural evaluation for Dixon. This is the second story here, main floor here, this is the entrance, 1931 building, right here on the south side of campus. You can see that in 2012, the bulk of it was a 2 rating. These areas where there's some shops here on the east side, here's the auditorium on the northeast side. Here's the challenge with the structure at Dixon. About 90% of our students are in 70% of the worst areas at Dixon all day long. And again, I get the same comments from the structural engineers, you know, and I asked this question, if you were to stand in front of our school board, how would you talk about your 2012 evaluation? It's the same. It's not, it just gets worse the longer we wait. And what makes it worse is the increased probability of a seismic event. That's the way they look at things. So anyway, this is the 2012 evaluation structurally.
So I'm gonna reveal something that maybe Mark doesn't want me to, but in a conversation we had yesterday, he said that even though they will not put it in writing, the engineers that he's been talking to would rate Wasatch as being slightly more serious than Dixon, but only slightly. And that they're reluctant to commit to anything because that might seem like it's an endorsement that Dixon is a really safe place to be for the next 20 years. And they're just, they would feel foolish about doing that. So,
yeah, thank you. The only difference they look at that with Wasatch and Dixon is 100% of Wasatch is seismically deficient. But with Dixon, you've got a second story, you've got some heavier roof sections.
and you can see right here, it says up on there at the top, 70%.
Yeah. You go to the next slide, Keith. So again, you remember the ages of the buildings. Yellow is 1931, pink is 1940s. The green portions, which are the worst designed structurally, those are the 1960 versions. And then you can see the later additions here. There was kind of an interior renovation in this east section, northeast section, 2005. And then the auditorium was 88, if I read that correctly. So again, it's just a mix. It's just a mix of a whole lot of additions. Just not the best. They did what they could with the space they had. You go to the next slide. Okay, this is just to remind you the concept we reviewed over this last several years. This was a concept that we reviewed for the footprinter site, to shift Dixon to that site. You can see how that sits. Our old Provo High baseball field that was here for several years was right here along this corner. And then the district purchased additional acreage, about 12 to 14 acres, here to the west and south. And those are the city softball
Would the
fields.
Mountainland area stay? Is there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that would stay. So anyway, that was the concept there. This is the concept to stay on site. Again, this is based on programming over the past year with faculty and Dixon administration, about a 1,200 student capacity. This is a 4-story concept. School would stay in session here, where it currently sits, while this 4-story structure was built to the north. And then once you've demoed everything, you have the green space on the south side of the existing campus.
I thought going over 3 levels got more expensive.
It does.
It is.
Structurally, it does, for fire reasons and structural steel reasons as well. Once you get that 4-story, it hits kind of a different level of engineering for everybody involved. But the only way to make this programming work with that capacity is to get a 4-story on that campus.
I have a question, just occurred to me. I guess maybe for the Dixon neighborhood people, so Gina, does the neighborhood care about a tall building?
My guess would be that I haven't had any conversations specifically about that, but based on other building and things like that, I think they might have some concern, but I think if that's what it would take, to keep the building where it is, they'd much prefer that.
Yeah. Okay. One thing to remember with that too, the bus drop-off still stays curbside on the west side. There's no space to create on-site bus drop-off. Then all the parking would be along the northeast side.
Does that represent an increase in parking, Mark, at all from what we've got now?
Yes, I just can't remember what the net increase is, but it's better than what we've got now. Yes.
Okay, so on the bottom of the slide, I'm reading it here, it says the playfield acreage difference between the Dixon site footprinter is 2.43 more acres at footprinter. And then the parking count, it gets cut off, so I can't read the difference. Do you remember the difference?
I can't remember the difference. I'll look at that and I'll send it to you. I can't remember that net difference.
But it says on this site it's 70 for that.
Yeah, yeah. And then you can see here, they dashed in some street side parking around the campus as well.
And
in
that's
places.
slanted, right?
Yeah.
The city has said they wouldn't be slanted, or we could work with them? to do
The
that?
city did say they would.
They would, okay.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Now, that discussion was about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while.
we got
That was
the
Austin,
Restroom.
right? Didn't
Yeah,
Austin
he's
say
not
you could
there
get it done? He's not there anymore.
Yeah.
So a big difference between the two is footprinters, we would have some space in the future if we had to put additions. This, there's no space for additions.
No, once you get this four-story structure here, that's it. The only way you could add on is if you take green space over the years and build onto the south on the existing campus. Yes.
So is there a big cost difference between the two sites in building the school?
The only cost difference between the two sites is if there's any desire to do historic preservation on the 1931 structure. That would add extra money on the existing site. But right now, these numbers don't represent that. So you're about mid 50 million for both sides. You're about the same range to go either side.
Can you just help me understand that more? Because with the 4 stories, I thought that does make it more expensive, and it does say they're the same square footage.
They're the same square footage, yeah. And so with these estimates, you are, until we get to the bid day, you're speaking in ranges.
Okay.
And so we know on the other site, will be slightly lower because we won't be dealing with what's going on site. It'll be an empty site, so we know we'll be able to improve that over time. With this one, we'll probably be at the maximum 59 million range to go to 4-story site. So.
Oh, and at the new site, we probably have to spend a little more on prep work, like underground plumbing, or no?
No.
Okay.
You are putting new connections in,
Yeah.
but here you're dealing with.
Which won't be available till 2025. You can't build a school at footprinters till 2025.
The
There's
city,
no sewer,
the city did confirm that there is capacity.
not yet.
They did.
No, they confirmed.
They already confirmed that for us.
Yeah.
About a year ago, they confirmed that for us, the Director of Public Works.
I'll talk to Dave Decker again.
That's who I spoke with.
Is there a way, I know this is a big community issue between the two locations. Is there a way that we could do a survey from the whole west side to ask them where they would prefer it to be?
I'll tell you right now, they will not move. They want it on site. You even try to
Yeah,
move the
there's
school,
other, but there's other
they'll
people.
be pissed.
There's plenty of people in my area that don't care either way.
Yeah.
It's not
Well,
completely
here's-
true. When
here's
you
the
say
problem.
they, that doesn't necessarily mean everyone.
Here's the problem, we did the survey last time, the west side, the Provo High side favored moving the school, but none of them were passionate about it. They were, oh yeah, sure, that sounds good, we get a bigger school,
You
great.
put the questions.
And the people who were against were passionate, and they brought fervor, and no one on the other side brought any energy whatsoever.
To me,
So it seems like a headache.
yeah, it's a headache, that I think that you have to come up with a process, you have to pay for it, it's almost like an election to go. We're
Well,
gonna
that's why
hit
I'm just bringing it
every
up.
house and say, this will be binding, whatever this product, if we can arrive at a process and we go, that's the process, how the community decides where it is, and everybody is clear on the process, and then almost treat it like an election, because if we decide, we'll always be wrong.
Well, I
always.
think we need to have some conversations with community members from all the stakeholders, right? Like the whole boundary, not
Yeah.
just,
Because
Right, where the
it's not
school is.
just, it's not just the Franklin area, it's not just the.
It's
Dixon,
all of my area,
It's the
too.
entire west side that this is
Yeah.
affecting.
but I think if we can engage in conversations with people and make it a thing we arrive to together, like we all want the best situation for our students and what is going to be best, and right now, there's not agreement on that, but if we can come together and over time have the conversation, I would think we could come to some kind of agreement. So it's gonna take time.
So with that, all that I ask,
Is
all that I ask,
But
I mean,
we have time, it's the
because we've
problem.
been doing that for 8 years now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so all that I ask is we get direction as soon as possible, because if not, we continue to waste money in these two old buildings. And it will only get more expensive as soon as systems start to fail.
So these conversations, if we do them, that Jennifer's talking about, need to happen starting pretty soon.
Correct. Yeah. And we'll do whatever whether it's this site, another site, 10 other sites, we'll do whatever. Just let us know what direction. And that, because right now, we really are in a bad position trying to plan for these two old buildings. It's a tough balance to try not to waste money, but every time you are, you know you are.
Right.
So, can you go to the next slide, Keith? Again, these are estimates, 10-year projection for what we should do at Dixon with the existing building. And again, you get to about 65% of a new building with what you would dump into that old structure over the next 10 years. Again, that doesn't include any preservation of that 1931 building. And then the estimated cost again is it's up to about $59 million if we were to start in 2022. And again, we would definitely use that $59 million on the existing site, and it would be slightly less on the footprinter side, just because you're not working around students and you've got some advantages with the old site.
Sorry, real quick, on the west, I heard a lot of grumbling about, and I think we kind of touched on it earlier, but I want to be clear, infrastructure, sewer, electricity. I heard different stories. Some said the price included it, some said it did not.
It did. The estimate includes what we would need to do to put a school there.
So we would have to pay for the infrastructure rather than like in other places, it's already there because.
There's a road connection we would pay for, and any connection points to existing city system, yes.
So that $59 million.
That's part of that estimate, correct.
Okay.
That's why that's the same price as the 4 stories. Some of that
Because you have to pay for the extra.
Some of that. And even around the old existing site, you'll be improving some outdated connection points from the city systems.
Okay.
I think, Gina, too, a lot of people were claiming that the city would have to also improve some infrastructure on their end. And so in the end, even though we're only paying, 45 for the new site, technically the city residents are also paying for the upgrades the city would have to do. And so that was the claim why it would cost more, is because the city is going to have to put in some sewer improvement.
So it would cost the school district more, but it would cost the people in the city more.
Like
Taxpayers.
theoretically and technically.
Theoretically.
But then the other side would say that's happening regardless.
Yeah, that's happening whether there's a school that goes there or not.
The
Right.
city charges us impact fees on existing sites when we make changes that impact those infrastructures. So we aren't free of impact fees.
So that's where the two sides were coming in. People were claiming that expense because the city was going to have to, but that's happening regardless. So then you just have to decide how would you feel about that expense that's happening regardless. Some people were saying that it was going to happen sooner. Some people were saying that they could delay that cost if we don't move out there. So that was just like a kind of a juggling act between city expenses and us and what would have to be for us or not for us.
Thank you.
Any other questions about Dixon?
I guess I should point out that back in 2014 bond, one of the reasons why the rebuild of Provo High School was put on that was because the 10-year estimated cost for maintenance for Provo High School was $1.8 million a year. This now equals $3.7 million a year. So if we use the same rationale as putting Provo High School to the top of the rebuild priorities, certainly Dixon has to be considered it's a big concern. We need to do something.
I completely agree, and Wasatch as well. So here's, as much as everybody wants them to be safe, we also don't like to pay taxes, so an increase in a bond. So, and I looked at the information, but help me understand, so we have Timview that we'll be paying for with the bond, and then if we do this, which needs to be done, then we'll have this bond, and then is there another bond that would come for school stuff in another 2 years?
So the only thing that would lie ahead of us is if we need a different, new elementary school somewhere on the west side, whether that's 5 years, 6 years, whatever that is, that would be a possibility. But past that, you've got Westridge and Canyon Crest, which would be between 2040 and 2045.
Oh, so that's down, so these two would be the last huge bonds that we would have to go to the citizens for.
These two, plus if there's a need for a new elementary school on the west side.
Well, plus down the road, we have to finish the Timothy project.
Plus a phase 2 for Timby.
How much of the, I know that it's all dependent on different things, but what are we looking at for Timview?
Another 80 at least, right?
I don't know, that would depend on the community and the board at the time.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
So, she brings up a good point. I see that there's needs on both schools, but is the community gonna really feel that way? Because I know there's bond fatigue, big time, and we barely passed the Timview, and that had to be done. There was no ifs, ands, or buts on that, we were gonna do it regardless. And it barely passed. And if we go and we use an NBA loan, a bond on this, either of these, is the community gonna feel like we're going behind their back and doing this without their approval, even though we have the authority to do it?
And I've got to add one more thing.
Go ahead.
I'm going to be the stubborn. I am not doing Wasatch without Dixon, and I'm not doing Dixon without Wasatch. Like, I refuse to let Dixon be forgotten. I know there's a huge push from the east side to get their Wasatch, and I don't blame them. But there's not a push from the west side because people don't have the time and the energy to do that over there. But they need it as bad. So I'm going to be stubborn. I'm going to say no Wasatch without Dixon. Like, that's just very important to me that Dixon doesn't get forgotten. And where Mark, I was going to ask you today, Mark, can you tell me that Wasatch has like way higher need than Dixon? And if you can show that to me on paper, if the engineers are going to sign off on that and say Wasatch is way more important than Dixon, then I'll get on board. But where you're telling me that they're almost exactly the same need, I feel like I cannot justify one over the other. And where we have bond fatigue, and the community hates that word, I am so petrified to even propose anything for the next, I don't know, couple of years at least. That's kind of.
And yet, were we getting the message though that they preferred smaller, like take one? I mean, I get what you're saying, like please put them together for this reason, but would they pass better if we take this one issue? We're going to talk about this one school. 30 million or whatever doesn't sound too bad. 90 million does, right? And then the next year, 55 million doesn't sound too bad. And we're addressing.
Right, but I think if we can't keep doing them year after year after year. There's still this bond fatigue that's going on. There's just.
See, that's true. I look towards that next 100 million for an improvement in Centennial, for fine arts and CTE so that's definitely going to be a bond. This is 100 million, another elementary school. That's one that will have to go to the voters. Right now, you're going to lose capacity. You're going to lose your tax dollars to other places because the next two interims, the legislature is looking for ways to start moving money around school districts, and they're going to eat into our capacity with their basic rate. So we either use it or we're paying for somebody else's students. And our taxes are going to go up regardless. And I understand that, yep, people get sick of this, but you know what? Just 800 yards that way, they vote every 2 years.
Well, and we're setting ourselves up for the same exact problem.
Yeah.
Because those districts, they have a regular bonding schedule. We're lumped out, and then we're not gonna really see anything for another 30 years, and then that board everyone's gonna hate.
But the next one is, you know, figuring out, you know, something is gonna have to happen with, classroom space at Centennial, and then we'll have this, and then we'll have Westridge, and then we'll have another elementary. And even when I go, oh, look, we have 20 million here, let's just, you know, let's tweak our capital and put 5 million in for the next 2 years, and here's 30. We get 30 million in capital to use that. Well, I know from experience that that 30 million is gonna get used on something I don't think about today, for sure. So I think but at the same time, we're borrowing money right now. We're borrowing money at 8% a year, because these are things that, again, Riddle Building, Dixon, absolutely a priority, has to get done. We're borrowing it, people just don't mind that we're borrowing from them at 8% a year.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so I'll add something to the conversation on, I mean, we've already talked about the building reserve earlier. I mean, Mark was showing you the capital projects, and he's got 6 million slated to hit the building reserve, which is 18.7 million, if we have to do re-roofing projects. One of the things that we can do to soften, whether it's a bond for both schools or one school, is if we move, we can use that building reserve and a little bit of our capital to soften the blow of the bond. So if you're looking at a $92 million bond to do these 2 schools, we gotta take into consideration some of these land purchase issues. I mean, obviously, if Wasatch is moved, that's gonna add to the cost, but assuming Wasatch were to stay at that cost, Dixon stays at about that cost, we could probably pull between the building reserve and a little bit of buffer that he's got in his capital right now. We could probably pull 18 to 20 million out to reduce that bond.
If what? That happens if what?
If we don't have to spend that money limping these schools along. So we've got it now, and if we can somehow make this move fast enough that we don't have to use those funds for roofing projects and draw that down $6 million, we can use that to help.
And we have some other options.
Yeah, and that's just an option. And I mean, the money's there, it's there for building purposes. It's what we did with Provost. We put the money aside so that we could match that money on Provost. There's nothing that says we can't use that money to offset the bond and reduce the bond.
But that would bring our reserves down to 0 again, right?
We wouldn't bring our capital reserves to 0. I would never recommend that. I would say keep your capital reserves at about 6 million. So you've got 6 million to take care of emergency issues, but it would bring the building reserve down. And a lot of school districts don't carry building reserve. I mean, you know, we've tried to just to be conservative and have that money there.
And we've had old buildings that we went,
Yeah.
which part of the roof collapses?
Right, I
Got
mean,
it.
for the most part, our building reserve, it built up, we used it Provost, and it's built up since. We really haven't used our building reserve.
So we might be able to whittle a bond down, I mean, if we look at
70?
every option to 60.
No,
No.
Like
no, because you don't want to totally, I mean, I guess it depends. If you really want to get serious, you could look at where can we make other cuts
Yeah.
in our operations and shift that to capital.
Or other assets that might not necessarily be as useful for us.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, you know, that's, if you want to start talking about property sales, but.
To me, like, I think that this will take a year of planning, but I think we have to move our capital rate to put more money into there.
And so that's.
People always ask us, why are you saving money? Well, this is how you save
Right.
money.
But to do
keep-
that,
you
we're gonna
keep-
have to look at our operating and say,
Yeah.
where can we draw back on operating to shift shift over that
Unless we
capital?
You're talking on our levy, McKay? You're
Yes.
talking-
Our capital levy.
Yeah.
So
Unless
we can
just
shift
change capital levy.
between our general fund and our capital, our basic, you know, without going through truth and taxation, because you're not raising your overall rate. So if we make changes operationally, I'm just gonna throw something out there. Let's say we said, you know what, we're gonna cut budgets across the board 1%. We're gonna take that 1% and we're gonna shift it to capital. Those are the types of things we could look at to also reduce that cost. But, you know, there's gonna be trade-offs. Where do you cut that 1%? What does that 1% affect? Does it take away from salaries? Does it take away from programming? So those are decisions that you as a board, if you want
At
us
the
to
very
start
least,
looking
I
at.
think, when it comes to that truth in taxation, I think we have to capture inflation for
Yeah.
salaries, for everything else. We have to do truth in taxation, just to say, we're to keep because we have these needs, we see them, and they're time.
But that's still a
Is it-
tax raise. I mean,
yes.
whether it's a bond or a truth in taxation.
But it's keeping the rate the same, or not reducing it as quickly as growth
Right.
goes, is something that we have to look at, because we have.
So there's options. I'm just saying that we could probably, if we're willing to sit down and do that hard work and make some other hard decisions, we may be able to reduce the amount of bond. But again, it comes at a cost. You know, if we're gonna shift from operations over to capital, something in operations is gonna have to give.
And the capital levy is the NBA amount we could, is that correct? Or-
No.
No, how much capital levy do we go out for?
Your max on your capital levy, oh my gosh. Why is it?
We have a lot of room there, don't we?
0.03, I think. 0.03.
And we're at point.
We have a lot of room in our capital levy, but again, it's a tax rate. But the reality of it is you can't build $90 million worth of buildings without some type of tax increase. It's no different than the average person who can't go buy a house without a mortgage.
And let's say we do this 2 years from our last bond, so let's say not this coming November, but the next one, right? How many of our other bonds will have dropped off?
So the next bond that drops off is actually that one on Provost, and that's a lease revenue bond.
That Provo Peaks, you mean?
Sorry, Provo Peaks, and that drops off in 2026, so it's coming due. The payment on that is not huge, I think it's only $460,000 a year. That's the one that goes into that sinking fund. And then after that, we're left with 3 general obligation bonds, one that was a refunding, and the 2 that were our $108 million for the 5 schools we just did.
And then the 80.
Those don't expire until 2037.
And with the one we just did this year, we're 2040?
Yep, 2040, 2041, I think, 2040.
So we don't have a lot to drop off really before.
No, but your overall debt drops off. So every year when that whole entire, your debt's dropping off, it's gonna impact. I mean, that's why when you see us go out for a new bond, you see that net number all the time.
Yeah.
Because your bond's gonna cost this much, but you've got some dropping off on principal. Your principal's still decreasing, so it ends up kind of netting out. So none of them mature, but the payment schedule's gonna slightly
And that happens
reduce.
every year. Every year it slightly reduces. And that's a function
Just
of-
like your mortgage.
Yeah.
A certain amount of it goes towards principal, a certain amount goes towards interest.
And on the other hand, the costs are going up 8%.
But the flip side is your costs are going up more than your bond payments are going down.
I mean, the bond rates are what, 1%, we're gonna pay 1%?
We have plenty of legal
Yeah, are
capacity.
people willing to pay those extra taxes right now?
Well,
Yeah, and they're not, I mean, will be super angry. It's just,
Yeah,
it makes
very
no financial sense not to do it right now with the rate so low.
well, and again, I think what I said earlier about the Dixon discussion, I think we also should have one in general about what this needs to happen as a community, as Provo. What do we support? What can we support? Would you support taking care of it all right now at the lower, without all the inflation over the years, or would you rather do one at a time? And I think if we can include people in these discussions and they have some ownership of what we come to, then they'll be more supportive and vote for it. And take ownership that these are our kids that we need to take care of.
I agree to a point, but I don't believe that the community is gonna really buy that. We said that with Timothy, and it barely passed. Like, you're voting yes for cheaper. You're voting no for more expensive.
Yeah, I think the difference of what I'm trying to see if we can get to is where we're having discussions that they feel they're part of the ownership, instead of us just telling them this needs to happen, please support. It's gonna take more work on our part, but I think it would help them feel like, okay, we're gonna do this together, not being told what to do.
The problem is 99% of the people aren't interested until
Until the ballot
like
shows
6
up.
days before they vote, they go, oh, my tax rate gonna go up $100, I'm out.
I agree.
Something to
I mean,
remember, I don't know in your neighborhoods, but my neighborhood still has employees because the The whole reason why the high school students want to stay in phase 2.5 is because the high school students have jobs and their parents don't. They're the ones that are putting food on their table. So until their parents get jobs again, I don't know if we can ask for another bond.
Also, Jennifer, just to your point too, stepping back a little bit to a couple comments ago, but you said it's gonna take more work on our part, to get, those conversations going. I am not opposed by any means to more conversations or anything, but I think we as a board have got to stay out of it to a degree, because we know people trust their neighbors more than they trust us as a board. And I think that was one of our mistakes. That was one of the things they told us in our last one, in our survey afterwards that we did, is we need to get out of that conversation, and that somehow we have to get that to be motivated by the citizens.
Yeah, so there's a group called Living Room Conversations, and one of their people has been working with the Timpview Outreach Club to do these conversations. And what I've learned about it, that's kind of what I'd like to model, and maybe they could even lead it, where they get diverse people together to talk about different issues and things, and they have set questions that they form to kind of help people share their different experiences and their own perspectives, but then help understand each other's perspectives and then kind of come to a consensus together. So I think to what you're saying, Rebecca, maybe if we could have one of those groups lead those kinds of conversations, that it's not us up there, saying this is how it is, but they're saying, here's some information, now here's some questions, let's discuss. And they lead it, and the people who are in groups of like 5 or 6 people, they come, and then you have groups over here, so you have multiple ones of them, and kind of come to some ideas in those small groups.
I just worry that that's a little bit idealistic.
Oh, it is.
I just don't know how on earth we're gonna get everyone to really come to a consensus. I mean, to really participate in the process. That's the hardest part, getting people to participate in the process.
It is. So it's also about finding key people in different neighborhoods, and you're not gonna get everybody, but at least will help us have an understanding. How are people feeling? What can we get the support for? We know these buildings need to be taken care of, but we do have to balance it with what will the community support, so it'll at least help us to understand those perspectives better.
So we need to move forward. This conversation isn't done. Not even a long shot. So I'm going to suggest that if you have other questions, to send them to Keith and Stephanie. We will readdress this in another board meeting. So this isn't done, but I think we raised a lot of good questions today, and we can start getting the ball rolling a little bit more on this.
If I can pitch an idea, in June, at the very end of the month, we have a study session in the early morning. Several years of the last few, we've extended that into being a little bit longer of a meeting to address bigger issues like this one. I think by that time, we may have some research completed on whether it's property sales or interests or whatever there are, even maybe to be able to propose different funding options for you. But you're right. I mean, the word bond is going to come up at some point, and that's just the reality. We don't have that kind of money sitting in the bank. But if we could target maybe the end of June as being an extensive discussion time for this with a little bit more free time to do so, it may be helpful.
I think the one thing you have going for you with the word bond is it's obviously not going to be this November, because it's going to be a year from now before we even think about breaking ground. The municipal building authority, you can do that at any time throughout the year. So this time next year, if that's what the decision was. I guess what I'm getting at is you're not going to impact your taxpayers this summer or this.
And I think that, to Terry's point too, where, there's COVID fatigue as well.
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
Although I do want to say that Utah's economy is doing fabulous compared to everyone else's.
yeah, but
Not
not
every,
everywhere.
but not every. I'm just saying,
Generally.
yeah. Hopefully, the recovery is quicker and easier than other places. So, as it seems to
So
be so
let's
far.
move this. We'll get a lot of questions answered, but do some more research, and in June we'll readdress it.
Chad, go ahead and drive.
What's that?
You
Go
can
ahead,
drive.
Chet.
All right.
I love Billy.
I don't know what that is. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks
Mark.
for your
Yeah,
time.
thank you, Mark.
Whenever I start feeling bad for myself, I think about Mark and what he goes through. Then I don't feel bad for myself anymore, Mark. So, you know, the other thing, Mark, is I'm trying to fix your buildings with network cabling. You know, hopefully maybe it'll hold the
That would
building
work.
together.
Yeah.
We run enough for cameras and other things.
We get enough duct tape and glue, I think you're onto something.
Hot melt glue.
Yeah, string. How about the string?
Well, every time a school entity reports, they get to do demographics. So I decided I would do demographics, okay? Because I was jealous that they got to do it, I think. So I'm just gonna go through our demographics real quick. You know, when we get down to this category, 100%. That's the technology for you. And when we talk about free reduced lunch count, we eat all the free lunches we can find. And if anybody worked with us when we were at the district office, you would know how true this is.
I will vouch for that.
No, seriously.
We don't invite them anymore.
They will still come over to the district office.
Well, why do you think we got kicked out of the district? It was so that people could have leftovers from meetings, because, man, my department, they'd be on it and they'd eat it all, like garbage. So, anyway. And they also have the ability to sniff it out, like Stephanie says, I think they still come over. I think Darren kind of hovers at the district office.
They can smell it clear across the
Yeah. Here's my varying departments. I'll kind of go over this real quick. We have networking and security. Security is relatively, we've been doing security for a long time. We actually have a full-time person dedicated to network security. He also does quite a bit of our physical security stuff. We have our website administration, we have network admin, and filtering. You know, and our filtering in Provo is probably filtered down further than anybody I've ever heard of. We filter more than just about anybody when it comes to keeping kids safe. This JP's almost full-time job sometimes. And when Jason gives him an investigation, and you know, that takes a lot of his time as well. We have provisioning, so that's setting computers up. We do a lot of repair, and we'll talk a little bit more about repair in a minute. Student information systems, that's Power School, also includes Kansas now. We have our help desk stuff going on. We have field technicians that go out to the buildings and fix things. And one of our newer positions is sitting in the back rooms, our AV. Audiovisual has really taken a leap as far as what we have in buildings, you know, from interactive TVs and projectors and classroom audio amplification systems and all that kind of stuff. So that's what it is. Now with technology awards, I'll show you all the technology awards we've won. None, because there are none. Okay, I always hate it when, like Stephanie gets CAFRs, and you know, I can show you right here. That's my wife right there. She got a Golden Apple Award. So I mean, people have awards we can win. You know, in Mark's they have OS1 awards they can win in custodial. Tech has nothing, you know. But if there were, we win them all. Because we are good. You know, and I don't just brag about us. I mean, I think anybody who's dealt with us a lot knows how hard we work and how innovative we can be. So we really try to stay ahead of a lot of things.
Okay, I'll jump in there. We have very few network outages. We have a very responsive, when something comes down, we don't get a call from one member of the tech department, we get a call from four.
Yeah.
They're all over it. And we have great civility. And I will tell you, I get almost no complaints in my entire time here, 8.5 years, almost no complaints from throughout the entire district about our network. And that's unheard of compared to where I've been in the past. So, good job, Chad.
It's really
Time in there too, when we did our security audit last year, we got a fabulous, whatever, I don't know if it's a rating or results or whatever, it was really great. So I agree that you would win all the awards now.
Yeah, we would at least win some. I mean,
Yeah.
I would try to get best to state that existed. And I've looked.
Yeah.
When I started in '95, here's some of the things we were supporting. If you look at what technology is supporting now, it's this plus some. I didn't even list them all. I mean, we have all kinds of things we do now. Like I said, AV's gone big, and we do a lot of security, physical security now. We're managing all of that stuff, all the security cameras, all the motion sensors, all of that kind of stuff. A lot of IoT devices, and you know, Melanie and I have a kinship with Raspberry Pis. We really like those little devices, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But there's a lot of different things that have come on the network over the years, and it's funny, whenever that comes onto the network, it doesn't matter which department had it before, when it hits technology, we get it. So we've inherited all these systems just by sheer, because it's technology, we don't know it, you guys do it. So that's kind of how we've inherited all these systems. In the future, we're looking at smart devices, more of those type of things, Internet of Things, solar panels, park installs, that was joking. And this one, I was telling Jason this morning, I wanted to put a taser in this chair, just so you know. The toilets, if we ever hook toilets up to the network, definitely need to be started. It could happen just for water, if somebody wants to track how much water we're using with that.
Say, at my work, we're doing smart toilets right now.
My house is hooked up, my toilets are hooked up, so it's there, now we're there.
It's there, I'm telling you. I wanted to show you real quick a program we use called Intermapper. And this we use to monitor everything in the school. So this is Provo High School. So you can see when we built this, like how many things throughout the classroom sections. And we have wireless access points, we have switches, we have sensors, I mean everything. So if wireless goes out in a certain part of the school, we see it. So we actually know things have gone down long before the schools know. And a lot of districts still, the only way they know a school's having problems is a phone call. So we've been really innovative with this. We've been using this for about 24 years. We've really developed it a lot and done a lot of things with it. You can see, I have another,
Is this live? Are we looking at it live?
It's live, yeah, this is
Oh,
live.
wow.
So what happens if something goes down? Does it start blinking red?
Yeah, it turns red. Let me see if I can show you. I had one red at Provo High, but they already fixed it. So I had that screen up at Provo High second floor because there were some switches down, but they fixed them already. You guys are a little bit too efficient. So over here at in our building, auxiliary services building, there is a server down. So it's a FileWave booster. So FileWave is what helps us manage a lot of our machines. We have a server that's having issues right now. And that can be anything from it's down, or we have hard drive failure, or any myriad of things. So we monitor a lot of things on all of our systems and know way ahead of time if something's gone down. When testing is going on, I wake up at 5 and look at this, and this alerts us, via text. And my guys, they get alerts up until 11 at night, and they start getting alerts at 5 the next morning. During testing, it's 24/7, because we can't afford to have a test start at 9 a.m. the next morning and something be wrong. But things happen, People dig up fiber. I always joke that, like with scouts, if you just give them a piece of fiber and they're out in the wilderness and they get lost, just bury it. Before long, a backhoe will be right along to dig it up. Just how it goes. Anyway, this is a pretty cool program, and there's a lot we can go into this, but it's really kind of a fun thing that we do. And I say fun, but I'm one of those nerds. That's why it's 100%. I'm one of them too. Let me talk about our inventory system. So many years ago at Provost, we had a pretty bad situation where somebody came into our parking lot, connected to our wireless, and did some horrible searching. Okay, we had a subsequent visit from the FBI, and Shane and I at the time were like, okay, what are we going to do? So we ended up developing a system for our inventory called Black Hole. And I'll tell you why that was a bad name later. But, the Black Hole, basically what we do is before any device connects to our network, like we know it's ours. So we put all of our devices in the inventory, and now if they try to connect to the network, it compares against the inventory and says, is this our device? And if it's not, it won't let them on. If it is, it lets them on. Our Black Hole system, for some reason, like a lot of our devices kept disappearing into the Black Hole, we would say. So we developed another one, and this is a high school student actually that helped us develop the Vault. And that one, we called it the Vault for the very reason that we didn't want it to start black holing all of our information. So that's the one we use now. I've had the state's come down many times. We presented it to UETN, we presented it all over the state, many districts, and also in a couple universities. One of the universities north of us wanted to hire my programmer away. When we explained how we did our inventory, he goes, wait, you don't let it on the network before it has all the right information? So we track everything from who purchased it, when, what the purchase order number is, all that kind of stuff, all kinds of data like RAM and hard drive space and all that kind of stuff. And when they saw what we were doing, they're like, we love this. We want it. We said, you have our code. But they're like, but you have to do a lot of programming to make it work with your stuff. And they're like, well, we want to hire him. And I'm like, So luckily they tried to hire him away, but he wouldn't go. He would go more in love with us, I guess.
That's UETN, Utah Education.
Utah Education, and I think it's a telehealth network now. It used to be just UEN, but they picked that up a few years ago, where they became part of the telehealth stuff. So that's UETN. So that's where our internet connection, just so you know, goes through them. And they filter stuff on their side, not nearly like we do, but they do a little bit of that. But all of our internet goes ultimately through the University of Utah, where UEN exists. This is our vault system. You kind of see all the stuff that we track. It's really hard to read that. We use the inventory for planning, obviously, in many different ways. I also meet with the schools every year. We meet with the principals and say, here's what's in your building. Here's your look at the next 3 years of what we're going to be pulling out, what's going out of date, that kind of thing. I wish McKay was here because we had a situation in a school where they felt like they were caught off guard, so we started looking ahead and started planning way further ahead with inventory to say, we know that over the next 3 years, these things are coming out. So we help the schools with the planning. This helps us a lot with replacement cycles, and Stephanie's been really good to work through us with replacement cycles and trying to get all that figured out. The state also now requires us every year to do an inventory report, so we have to fill out a report and do it. Takes us a matter of hours, takes most districts weeks to months to put that data together because of what we've built. It really is a cool thing. We also have a lot we do statistical data. Looking at our inventory, you kind of see, I'll clean this up just for a minute, you kind of see all the different devices we have and how many, and what our counts are. You see Chromebooks, we've got nearly 17,000 Chromebooks at this point. A lot of those are have already aged out, and we've pulled them out, we just haven't end of life them yet. You can kind of see we have a lot of different devices. Now, out in industry, when you talk about how many texts per device, that's what the industry says. Now, I was in a state meeting with the Digital Teaching and Learning Grant, and they actually had that number in their grant, saying that this is what we want all districts to have. And a couple of us raised our hand, we said, that means I get 5 times my staff. Because they didn't realize that our numbers look more like that. And that's our actual number. We have 1 tech to about 1,250 devices. So you kind of know that the battle we deal with in education when it comes to trying to support machines, it's a challenge. And so it's funny, the next time they brought up digital teaching learning with all the state tech directors, that line was out. They completely removed it in the next revision. So, anyway. I wish they'd left it because that would have been awesome, you know. We get a lot done. We get a lot done anyway. Here's our work order system stats. Kind of want to show you what we do there. Go on to each one. So this shows you now we just started tracking this really close recently, so I don't have more data than this to show you. But you see our work order counts and kind of how it goes up and down by day. As this gets further out, we're going to have a lot more data to show you as far as that's concerned. Right now, we're sitting about probably around 400.
Are those different paces each day, or some of those are carryover from the day before?
They're carryover, and I can show you. That's just our total count for that day.
Okay.
So this is what more of a daily count looks like. Look at the blue, that's how many work orders were created that day. You see that almost 120 in one day. And then you see the number, the yellow is how many we're completing in the same day. So that kind of gives you an idea of what's happening. And that waxes and wanes. Beginning of the school year, that goes through the roof. Because we're trying to just get everything done all at once, so it's hard at the beginning of the year. This is interesting. So if you look at our data over the past several years as far as how many work orders we've had, and the reason this one's higher, when we did the Chromebook distribution, we created a second help desk for parents so they could call in and they could create work orders. So we had 2 systems going at the time, so I just added the parent work orders. You can see how many parent work orders we had coming into it. Like over the past several years, that's a huge increase in the number of work orders we've been getting. Obviously, there's several reasons for that. I think part of it is AV has caused a lot. We have a ton more Chromebooks now. Trying to do some of the other things. Oh, cameras and like all that type of stuff. Because anytime a camera goes down there, they don't like the angle of the camera. We're out there fixing those kind of things. And so far, we're almost at 3,000 just so far in 2021. So we're looking to exceed that number. So every time a work order is completed, they can do a survey. So here's the survey results. And you kind of see that mostly satisfactory as far as how fast we're getting to the work orders. I'm actually really proud of that 80% number. When we distributed that many Chromebooks and had that many people calling us, it was crazy. I mean, we went through, I don't want to say what we went through, but those guys were really good. We did a really good job keeping up with that. So I'm proud of that number. Last year, that number was at 95%. So when I ran the data for last year, it was 95. This year, it's 80. But I'm so proud of that number. I think that'll continue to go up. And people felt like we responded pretty fast to fix their problem. Chromebook Stats, talking about those. So last spring, we distributed 5,100. This year, we distributed 13,000. So that's how many Chromebooks that are sitting out there right now. And that count is almost exactly 13,000. We checked that number this morning. So that's how many Chromebooks are actually issued to students right now.
Chad,
Yeah.
out of curiosity, how many do we expect to not receive back or be broken? Or is there a percentage or an estimate?
We figure we lost about 8% last summer. But a lot of that was due to, we didn't collect it at the end of the year. A lot of, just the way we collected it was different. This year, we've been working with Todd really closely, we've been working with Alex, trying to figure out in the elementary and high schools how we can collect those and not have that same issue again. But that's where a lot of it happened. And we had 15% loss, but over the summer, when we started the next school year. So we got them trickling into the summer, and then beginning of the school year, they're like, hey, I have this Chromebook, I want it to work. And we're like, okay, there's our missing one, so we take those back. It ended up being about 8%. But we don't anticipate it'll be quite that high this year, but we'll see. But along those lines, Rebecca, it's like, as we talk about the Chromebook repair, this is where it kind of gets interesting. So in 2020 and 21, we had about 1,000 repairs. So far this year, we've had 1,600 repairs. Now, last year, we didn't distribute nearly as many, and you have a lot going back and forth with backpacks, which, as you know, can be pretty brutal. They are ruggedized Chromebooks. They're not like your cheap Chromebooks. They're actually pretty decently built. But even with that, we've had a ton of breakage this year. It's literally gone up in the last 3 years by 425%. So I now have 2 full-time people repairing, where last year I only had 1.
But based on the amount you have out, is it a similar percentage of breakage, or do you see more?
I said it one more time.
Since you have so many more out, are you seeing a similar amount, like percentage of breakage, or less or more?
It's probably about the same.
About the same.
Yeah. For the period of time that they had it, and it's pretty close to the same. But last year we distributed 1 for every 2 students, so roughly. But yeah, there's been a lot of breakage. And with that breakage rate, we haven't talked about interactive panels yet. So like a lot of those are still under warranty, but some of those we're actually starting to repair as the warranties are expiring. And one of the companies we bought the TV from went out of business, and now we can't get parts. So we're having to kind of use other TVs and that kind of thing. But that's been Kate's fun endeavor. In fact, there hasn't been Kate. He's really enjoyed breaking TVs. But we're starting to repair those now too. So repairs are just going to continue to rise as we start looking at all this stuff. Next year, obviously, we probably won't send them home as much in the elementary schools. We still will. We'll be able to, but we won't have them stationed at home. They'll be at the school. They send them home when they need them. So hopefully that decreases some of it. And this isn't even all that. What tends to happen this time of year is people will keep all the repairs kind of quiet until testing starts, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, here you go. And we're repairing 1,000 at a time, so it gets crazy around that time frame. So we don't really know. I'll let you know what the numbers look like later. These are some of the cost savings that you see in technology. E-rate, we bring in about $200,000 annually with that grant. Digital teaching and learning brings in about $500,000 a year. COPS grants. Now, I don't take credit for this. Where's Doug? If you left the room. Doug does a lot of the work with his people in COPS grant. So he does the work, gets the money, and then makes me do the work. So that's kind of how it goes. Warranty eliminations. We have stopped buying warranties with computers just because we started, you do the math, and we figured, with the amount breaking, if we just paid for them outright versus paying for the warranty, what it would be, and we saved quite a bit eliminating warranty. Maintenance agreements, like we have all kinds of companies we work with, and they all want annual maintenance agreements, and we've been creative in how we've done those and saved quite a bit of money. My very first year in the district, in fact, within my first couple of weeks in the networking position when I was in that job, they were paying $100,000 a year for maintenance, and I was able to just eliminate the $100,000 by just buying shelf spares. I bought 2 at $500 and a $5,000, 2 at $5,000 versus the $100,000, and then I just let those sit on the shelf. And if one died, I would replace it, and that's kind of how we do it. So we do a lot of creative things that way. Internet of Things projects. Interestingly, that's $100,000 annually that we've saved by doing some of these projects ourselves with these little mini computers called Raspberry Pi. And I could go into detail on that, but I don't think I have time. If you want to know later, I can definitely talk to you, knowing you and I should talk. As far as procurement replacement cycles, we've been working with Stephanie and Keith and you with the board to try and get some of these replacement cycles going with teacher machines, staff machines, student Chromebooks. And what's nice is now that we're managing all of that, we can buy in bulk, so we can save quite a bit of money. The other thing we're doing is we go around and replace machines. If somebody has a desktop or a laptop, we're saying, you've got to pick. Either have a laptop or a desktop, we can't have both. So, with Keith's support, we've been working through a lot of that. This one's really interesting. I mean, I don't think people understand how much iProvo, doing what they did and partnering with us and putting fiber huts on our property, has saved us. I mean, it's an enormous amount of money, and because other districts, they have to pay for those connections from the schools back to the district office, where we don't. And UEN's come in on top of that, and they've been helping us get other connections in, so now we have 2 connections in every building. So if one's cut, the other one stays up. So our reliability of the network's gone way up. But that's been a neat project, and we have 10 gigabits to each school. Most districts are lucky to have 1. We have 10 to each of our schools. So it's pretty phenomenal what they've done, and I'm grateful Provo City came to us and close that early on. And then we do a lot whenever we look at, when the system dies, do we want to keep it in-house and keep the server here, or do we want to move it out to the cloud? So we analyze every system every time to say, okay, do we want to have it here, or do we want to move it out to the cloud? So, see, there's quite a bit of money that we work to save every year.
So what do you do with that money?
It's just saved, I don't know.
Yeah,
I wish I got it.
or more.
You know, this has been over the years.
That's my wife's thing.
That's what it could cost if I wasn't doing my job. Maybe that's what it is.
I thought it was leftovers or something.
No, we buy food with it, Keith, because that's. So here's some of the partnerships that I've been involved with. Obviously, the iProgram is the thing I just talked about, and Camp Big Springs is another one I can get involved with. City does a lot for us, and I'm grateful that we have a city-district partnership the way that we do. We're really lucky to be able to partner with them. Just so you know, Big Springs 2 is actually owned by the city. The property is not owned by us, it's owned by the city. And they do a lot to maintain it, give us spring water. They built a big old 5,000-gallon water tank with a chlorinator system building just below it, just for us. So,
And how is it that technology somehow got in charge of Camp Big Springs?
Because I was involved with it for a really long time. I mean, I taught there for a while. And then I think the other guy retired. He's like, hey, Chad, you know camp, we'll let you do it. So.
I used to room with Chad when we were both at Camp Victory. We were techniques.
We were. He snores. But, yeah. So I've been involved in camp for about 26 years now. So I know it in and out, and it's a fun program. I love what it does for kids. And initiatives. These are things we're going to be working on, of course, this next year. We got the assignment to take over all staff computer replacements. We're now doing all the student Chromebook replacements. We mapped all the schools, so a lot of the schools' rooms didn't have room numbers. Like they were just blank. And with E911, so there's a new law that says if you dial 911 from a phone, we have to know not only what building it's in, but we have to know what floor it's on. Or, you know, if there's multiple buildings like at Oak Ridge, you know, the old Oak Ridge building, Wasatch 2, we have to be able to say this is the Wasatch 2 building, second floor, room 13. So we're doing a lot of work, and we had to map every single space that could ever have a phone in it. Has to be mapped. So we went around and mapped all of them. In some of the schools, you'll see our label up there. It's just a black label that has the room number on it. We've had to change all the maps and fix them all. So a lot of places, they've added walls or taken walls away. We had to go map all of that out. That was a huge, huge thing. You know, we're doing this summer is we'll actually get the 911 service functioning. That means we have to lock phones down so they don't move. Because if a phone moves, that information follows that phone. So if someone moves to the other side of the building, they call 911, they may not show up at the right room. So that's something we've been working on. Obviously with construction, you almost can't do anything in construction now without technology's involvement. And Mark's been excellent in the way he's approached this. We work really closely together on any construction project to make sure that the technology needs are met in those areas. We've also done some security audits. We mentioned the one that Guy posted last year. We also do some where we bring UEN down to do security audits on us, and we've had a couple. Todd's been involved, and Keith's been involved in a couple of those meetings, and we've done very well as far as our security audits have gone. We also are going to be working on getting the temp survey out next week, and get some pulse on how we're doing out there. So we're going to be working on that, and that was Todd's suggestion. The last thing I just want to update you on, Jennifer, I know this is that you sent me an email on this, and I've heard it from a couple others, is that parents are wanting control of the Chromebooks. They want to see what's happening. A lot of their suggestions, you know, are good, and they're saying, hey, I know there's an extension you can put in Chrome that'll do this. The problem is when we talk home environments versus an enterprise environment, that really changes the game a lot, and the price just skyrockets. We can't just control onesie twosie Chromebooks. Because we have to ensure the filtering and everything else is functioning. So we're still digging into this. We've done a lot of research. We've had a couple of vendors come out. We're actually demoing some where we're actually using them. The challenge is filtering them, because either we have our iBoss filter, which filters everything. If we choose one of these other products, like Go Guardian, for example, they want to take over the filter. You can't do them both together. You have to choose one or the other. So that would create a possible situation for us having to manage two different filters. And that is, anyway, we're looking into it, and I'll bring more data to you later, but we're still looking into this, and we'll try and figure out a way, because we really do, I mean, as a parent, I would want this, you know, I would love to have it control, but anyway, it's a challenge we're trying to overcome, so we'll keep you posted on that, and it may have a price tag, you know. The Go Guardian, we're looking at $70,000 a year, you know, for something like that, and we're just trying to figure out all the possibilities. Any questions on that? Yeah.
Do we plan to have kids take home Chromebooks, even not in the pandemic?
Wait, say that one more time.
So, we're talking about parental controls as a Chromebook because the kids have them at home, is that
Right.
correct?
Yeah.
So do we plan to have this available every year from now on, even though we will be in a pandemic? The kids will have Chromebooks to take home?
Probably.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So, and it's not just at home. A lot of parents say, I want to see what they're doing at school, because not only do they have their Chromebook all day, at lunchtime, what are they doing on it? So parents are just trying to, see what their kids are doing. And if it's just a simple matter of reporting, anyway, we got to look at this. We've had about 30 parents complain on this.
I was gonna say, I've had people complain to me too, that, my kid just wants to play games all the time on it.
Same.
So, is there ways to stop the gaming? I don't even know, is there ways to?
We try, but it's just like, as many gaming sites as we shut down, that many open up. It's just a cat and mouse game we play all the time, So we try, and if you hear of any that they're doing, we can
I'm
try.
hearing of .io. So, if it ends in a .io, that's what I'm hearing,
Okay.
so.
So, it's amazing how, like, poor JP, whenever these type of initiatives happen, he's up till 1 and 2 in the morning trying to stay ahead of the filtering side of these things.
They're quick.
It really is hard. These kids, is what they're trying to, a lot of them are just trying, But JP's really good to report out. In fact, we have one elementary classroom that we tell her students, look, if you do something bad on those computers, JP's coming, And so one day he walked in there, and he's gonna take all your computers, and one day he walked into their classroom like, the teacher's like, oh, hey, JP, and all the kids are like, oh no, we just lost all our computers.
My kid came home super scared of JP one day. I'm not joking.
Yeah, I believe it.
Rex came home and was petrified of JP and knew he was gonna just ruin his, Chromebook usage.
Do you have much more? 'Cause
I have one more. I just have one. And all it is just a thank you to the school board for all that you do for technology and supporting our initiatives and what we do. Also to the district administration, for everything and their support as well. Keith and Todd, especially as Keith is my boss for a number of years now. I get to have Todd. They've both been fantastic to work with, and they both let me run. And sometimes they stop me from sprinting when I try and sprint. Sometimes they slow me down, or beat me down, in some of those cases. But at that point, I appreciate my staff. They're not here. I wish they were. They're an amazing group of people. They work really hard, and they're amazing at what they do. I'm jealous of their abilities sometimes. But they're amazing, and we also have, I'm thankful for Stephanie and some of the departments that have worked so closely with us in HR. Anyway, anybody else I forgot, thank you to them too. I think that's it.
So Chad, I want to display something here and have you just tell the board what it is, and then I assume we'll take a break for a couple minutes.
Okay.
Okay?
Let me just,
So if you could just tell the board what this is they're looking at.
not that. 'Cause I can't tell you what that is. Oh, yeah. So this was a video I made for Keith. These are active attacks. So when you talk about network security, these are active attacks that were happening live when I was doing this. You can see, like,
On our school district?
no, that's showing the United States. So you can see, if you look up here, you see the United States, and you see active attacks that are happening either from the United States or to the United States. You see in Europe, there's quite a bit of action going on over there. China, there's always action there. Russia's pretty active. But you can see those were active attacks when I took this video. So we have a screen up down in our building that shows some of the active attacks that are going on. Our firewall is always under attack, always, 24/7. There's people trying to break in. And they would love nothing more than to break in. The school districts have become more of a target recently for they want to attack you and then take you and have you pay money to get ransomware. Is what it's called. Yeah, that's become big, and they haven't really targeted school districts much, but they are now. In our past, we just haven't seen a lot, but it's happening all the time now.
I mean, if they're targeting us, they're not targeting super wealthy. There's plenty of other districts that have more money than we do.
And there have been those attacks throughout the nation, and different school districts have, I think they paid the ransom.
Yeah, they have. Was it University of Utah that paid that big? I can't remember who that was. I think it was University of Utah that got hit and they paid the ransom.
So a lot of people, I think, may wonder, well, why are we spending so much effort on security? This is why. Chad has changed the program. A few years ago, I saw this, and it was showing all of the things that were actually landing on our network. One of the screens would show that. Yeah. And it was frightening to watch that. So these are some of the big ones that are coming into our country.
I have a quick question that either Steve, Stephanie, or you could probably answer. This deals with community councils because they're doing their trust lands, and a lot of people are asking if they need to save money for Chromebooks with their trust land money.
Stephanie, you're probably better to answer that one.
So we're working through, and you'll see in our budget priorities that we've got, a large amount of money for replacement cycles. We're working through, letting the principals know that the money they used to spend on their tech devices, they're still going to spend that money, but they're gonna spend it by being billed by tech. So the tech is taking it over and trying to centralize it and make it clean and easy. But there's still gonna be need to pay for some of those. So if they've been paying for a lot of their stuff out of trust lands historically, I would say they probably should plan on a little bit of it.
The challenge is that some schools want to place orders for machines that are not on our approved list.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's hard for us to support them, repair them. And one of the reasons why we developed that preferred equipment list was because we can also get better deals. I mean, if we're dealing with 1 or 2 vendors or 1 or 2 brands. So we're kind of in a transitionary phase right now.
Yeah. So definitely being thought about that.
Just something I want to bring up when we were talking about parental controls, I think it's really important if we can get something like that, that'd be great. But as we think about it, we're going to continue to provide Chromebooks. I think we should also look at how we can support our schools in helping students learn skills of how do you manage your time, how do you not let yourself get distracted when you're supposed to be doing schoolwork or homework, mental health, getting out and finding other things to do that is not just in front of the screen, like how we can do some of that social emotional training as well to help them.
I wonder if some of the programs that are being used already address that. I'd be curious to find out them first.
Yeah.
I know there's a bunch of schools, a lot of trust land plans include socio-emotional wellness programs that they'll implement. Like I know Westridge implemented one this last year. I'd be interested to find out if it includes stuff like that. That would be a good thing.
Yeah, we should look into that.
Okay.
Thank you,
All right. Is there any other questions? Anything else that the board wants to know? Anything I failed to mention or any further questions?
Tell your whole team very thank you. If we could give you an award, we would.
We'll get you an award.
Okay, I like it.
So,
It might be one you get from DI. I will take it.
Okay, so I can't go
you
there
can,
now.
you can display it up at Camp Big Spring.
There you go. We can put it up.
Notice that you display it in your office, man.
All right. Well, thank you all. Sure appreciate it.
You want to take them away by 5?
Yeah, so let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back here in 5 minutes.
Hey, Chad, you don't use this on my computer to display.
I totally lost blankets today.
I
I'm
should've.
getting smart when we come here.
You're 1 year ahead of me. I'll get there next year.
I gotta find the, hey Kate, where's the remote? You did.
For what? Oh, it's up there on top of the TV.
What's on the agenda next?
Communications and stuff.
How you doing?
Hey Kate, will you look up? The settings on this? Figure out how to do it. I know
We
it's.
can't get it Bonnie to present it for me, but it's easier for her.
Oh boy. Anything going on? I'm just trying to do chat.
It's supposed to, Jake and I chased the whole street.
Focus on
Chad. Go to general.
Boy, you're not bad.
Go to accessibility.
What's that?
It says accessibility.
I haven't done around today, but I didn't hear any more yesterday, and we haven't.
We found yesterday, so it makes us really.
Oh, there you go. Under motion.
Not your motion.
That's what it says. Do the autoplay previews off.
No, our first called me and he had one guy on Facebook wondering why it's only pulled off. Responsibility that he had this put out. It impacted my answered that, and then
They're all terrible. I know. I had a guy who wants to hold my spot. Still, well, right.
Yeah, that helps too. I've been able to
I'm thinking about staying.
whatever you can do.
But I remember all this stuff.
This is all the fun stuff.
Well, as an educator, I was probably unpurposely intermittent fasting anyways.
That's the basic
So I didn't go back and go out.
Fine part. I just. Sure.
That's the stupidest thing of all time.
Yeah, no, it was so, the stupid part of that was the city council.
Yeah.
They found you somewhere, and they never ever like really mentioned it. They never put their word in it. I was like, you have to still this part.
So I've been doing more lentils, I've been doing more lentils, vegetables,
It's
and
so
I'm
simple.
really getting.
And it looks better than.
That's just one.
Yes.
This one's from India. This was always too bad. It was
Yes.
always.
How do we turn the heat up?
We don't.
We don't.
We put on our coats.
Yeah, I know, I brought a blanket, so, I mean.
Start a little fire.
For the insurance
Buttercups?
We try to keep it under like 3 grams, you know, I mean, we're not perfect, but we're moving in a momentum. We're trying to build it. That's what we're doing. COVID really helped us cook a lot. Honestly, we can jumpstart. Sometimes we'll ask for days.
That's right.
Well, there is a community.
I was like, I'm not gonna have any candles. And I'm gonna go back and get more.
You know what's funny is it's not like
All right, let's go ahead and get back.
Those are nice looking apples.
I wanted to put it in time. Of course, we're not.
2022 budget.
Okay, thank you, sir. Not to be posted on.
Okay. Everybody's here. Okay, well, it's that time of year, we're in our budget cycle for coming up on the next fiscal year. I think this time of year, because we're always kind of in limbo until legislation is done, knowing what exactly is going on, what kind of funding we're gonna have. So as we go through these numbers, keep in mind, these are early estimates. They're preliminary numbers. There's a lot to be settled still in the next couple weeks of legislation. So, actually, I guess one more week of legislation. So, but this is kind of a high-level revenue and expense projections for the next fiscal year. And basically, we're just kind of looking to you as board to kind of a nod of the head as to whether or not you like the direction we're taking and if you want to change it. So, when we build our budgets, we always build our budgets with the board goals in mind. So, continuous academic improvement, support for teachers, teaching in line with research, certainty and stability, financial prioritization and long-term planning, and of course, teamwork and professional conduct and civility. So a lot of these budgets are based upon, obviously, support for teachers in classroom and education, as well as long-term planning. Mark's already covered capital projects. That's a large part of this budget, so we always kind of give him a little bit of extra time beyond what I talked about. We'll be talking about possible salary base. I kind of set up a base budget with this, similar to what the legislation does. I say this is where we can start with our budget, and then as final numbers come in, we can change. So we'll be looking at some salary options, taking a look at what our medical increases for the next year, student safety and security needs, COVID costs that we've dealt with this year and into next year. And then the big ticket items, where a lot of our money is spent is curriculum, IT, capital facilities, transportation, etc. We are in FY21 right now. Most of these numbers are going to be for FY22, but I always like to just show everybody what our approximate budget is in the current year. So right now we have $168 million in revenues. That was our approved budget, and as you know, we come to you on occasion for budget changes. So that doesn't include any of the budget changes since we approved it back in August. But we approved $168 million in revenues with $166 million in expenditures. Generally, there's a little bit less in expenditures because there are grants and whatnot that carry over into another fiscal year. So typically you spend the money you have for a fiscal year in the fiscal year, but there's always some grants that go into September or even into the next fiscal year. So that's why that number is generally a little bit lower than your revenues. You'll see that most of our money is spent on salaries and benefits. That adds up to about 72%. It's usually about 80%. It's a little skewed for this year because in purchase services, we have some bond money being spent. What's going to be bond money being spent? So if you pulled out the Timpview High expenditures that we've incurred or that we're going to incur, your salaries and benefits are about 80% of your budget from year to year. Federal revenues in this current fiscal year are about $13.5 million. These are the bigger categories that make up those revenues: Title I, IDEA, Medicaid, CCLC, which is some of our after-school stuff, and school lunch. School lunch is kind of its own entity unto itself because it's federally funded. She operates on her own funds from the feds, and we have to work within that budget.
And Stephanie, this year we got a bigger grant because of COVID, right?
Yeah, so this year, that number's actually going to go up by the end of the year. She's got a lot more reimbursable meals because we had those waivers that said she could feed kids outside of school, all kids who are to 18, and she can put in reimbursement to the feds for all of those meals. So her reimbursement rate is a lot higher this year than it normally is. So she'll be a little bit more flush with money than typical. However, the concern there is she's also lost counts. So going into the future where she has kids actually buying meals, if those kids don't come back, her actual revenues will drop off if she doesn't get those meals back up. So there's always a balance there. It's a good thing to have those reimbursable meals. It doesn't cost us anything, but then if your meals are actually dropping off, that's always a concern in the child nutrition area. The other next group of our local, let me go back to that first slide. You'll see here that the breakdown of revenues, most of our revenues, 50% come from state. The next big section is local, which is your tax levies that as a board you levy. And then we've got a small amount from federal. So that's your federal piece. Your local piece, which is your state, or is your levies. We make some assumptions over 10-year periods, over 5-year periods or less. In this district, we've always kind of made the assumption that we would try to stay with inflation. That was what McKay was referring to earlier. As most of you know, for quite a few years, we didn't do truth in taxation consistently, and we kind of got way behind on our local effort and staying up with that inflation. Since we've been doing it about every other year, we're able to capture some of that inflation and stays pretty stable. I think the benefit to taxpayers there is that you're kind of smoothing out the effect instead of waiting until it's dire and you have to do it and you've got a much larger increase. CPI, which is basically inflation, in Utah is at 1.4 and nationally it's at 1.4. We're usually a little lower than national, but national is a little bit lower this year. And as you know, the last truth in taxation we went through to increase property taxes was just this last summer in 2020, and that was 100% for teacher salaries. So if we stay on track with the way that we've been operating, trying to do truth in taxations every other year, we would be going out in 2022, the summer of 2022. We get about $67 million in local revenues. Most of that is your property taxes, and that includes your debt payments. Debt payments are about $9 million a year. So about $9 million of that 57 goes towards debt. We have a little bit of local income from indirect. So when we have federal grants, we can charge indirect costs for the cost of administering those grants and taking care of those. So we have a little bit of indirect that we get off of those grants that comes back to us in local. Local fees and interest income, most of that is school fees out of the high schools. Interest income is probably about maybe $600,000 of that. The last couple of years, our interest income's been pretty good because the rate's been high and now they're starting to drop back down. So interest income's dropping off a little bit. And we also had some money from that bond that was sitting in the bank while we were building Provo High that we finally obviously have used, and we're not earning interest on that anymore. We assume, just based on growth in the city, that we'll get 600 to 800,000 additional property tax each year. As you know, as assessed values go up, your rate automatically drops. So the taxpayers as a whole, we don't get any more revenue for fair market value adjustments. We only get new revenue for new growth. An individual taxpayer may pay more because their assessed value individually was more than what we get as a district. So we as a district, the rates fluctuate so that we get the same amount of revenue from last year. But we usually do have some new growth, new buildings, et cetera, that usually brings in about $600,000 to $800,000 a year. And then the basic rate that was frozen a couple years ago in legislature, usually that also drops with assessments. They froze it for 5 years. We've got 2 more years after that, FY22 and FY23. However, some of the stuff they're talking about doing may affect that in the future. But that will bring in, somewhere in the neighborhood of 500,000 additional tax dollars that we don't usually get. And then state revenues, which is the largest piece of our revenues. As you know, a lot of complicated math there in the minimum school program. Generally, the state, as you see, usually does 3 to 4% on the WPU. This year they've done a little bit more, and they generally do that to stay within inflationary growth. They always fund growth. Growth isn't really something we have to worry about. We don't really get growth money because we're not a growth district. The governor, 2 years ago, put out a large 10-year plan. It was a pretty aggressive plan for education. He wanted to be the top 10 nation in 10 years. And he usually requests, he or she, if we ever have a female governor, typically the governor will request at least a 4% or more increase on the WPU. Legislature doesn't always support that, but typically the governor will ask for at least 4% or more. And I think the governor's this year was right about 6%, if I remember right. Last year, WPU finally, when the dust settled from COVID happening right at the end of legislation, we were supposed to get 6%, and then they got concerned about, you know, what's gonna happen with COVID and the economy, and so they backed it down to 4%, which was still, you know, enough to operate with. It was still welcome. We've got 88 million this year in state revenues. 65 million of that is from the WQ and the basic state program. The TSSA account, that is actually money that goes out to the schools for them to operate, similar to their trust lands. It's operated quite similar to their trust lands, with the exception that they don't have to have community councils for that piece. And then the state leeway programs, which is the equity piece of the minimum school program, we get about $6 million on it. Any questions on revenue? Okay. I wanted to put this in here because back in 2016, we did a truth in taxation. The board approved a truth in taxation, and that money was used for some salary increases, about $750,000 for annual curriculum replacement. I think it was about $120,000 for fee waivers out at high schools. I think we had $400,000 on tech infrastructure replacement on that increase, and then some miscellaneous things to do with safety and whatnot. At the time it was passed with a 5-year plan, saying let's assume that we need these numbers for 5 years. I'm asking that we just continue that. I'm asking that we see the benefits. We obviously can't take away from salaries unless we make some cuts. Curriculum still has needs, tech still has needs. That money is still being used in annual replacement. So I think the total on that was about $3.5 million. It's been an ongoing item for 5 years. I've made the assumption that we're just going to continue spending that money the way we.
So Stephanie, can I clarify? When you say 5 years, it's not that the funding was 5 years, it's the priorities that exist for 5 years, right?
The funding was ongoing. It's a tax increase, so the funding is still there. We just had, at the time, said those were our priorities for those 5 years. And really, they're still there. Nothing's changed. Nothing has changed that need. So in this, I'm assuming that we're going to continue those in the ongoing budget. When we're looking at expenditures, we kind of have to look to the future. We have to know, I mean, we just saw this presentation from Mark, obviously long-term planning and being prepared for what might happen in 5, 10, even 20 or 30 years is pretty important, especially with capital planning. So when we're looking at this, we always have to keep in mind, don't do too much now because you need to have some balances and some fund balances going forward to be able to do certain things. So typically we try to end the year to the good, about $500,000 in our unrestricted, which is a designation that says we can use the money for what we feel we need for. We always have to plan on our contribution to the state retirement, which is currently about 24% on Tier 1. Tier 2 is a little bit lower. Each year that the URS retirement system has to make a determination if they're going to increase or lower that contribution rate. Right now they're holding it steady. So had they said, well, we lost money this year like they did 10 years ago, I think we went from 15% to 20% one year. That was a 5% increase on salaries for us to absorb in 1 year. So we always have to take into consideration what's happening with those types of things. We, as a board, you have basically stated that you always want to try to at least give your employees a 2% raise, unless there's something major going on in the economy that would keep that from happening or there's a cut in revenues. So we always assume at least a 2% salary increase. The last several years, we've managed to keep our medical inflation quite low. It's only 2.5% after experiencing quite a few years of 10, 12% increases, which is a lot of money for the district to have to afford. We are being held at 2.5% for this next fiscal year. We're still working through that with Select Health to see if maybe we can extend that for another couple years after that. A lot of that was because we took on the wellness program. So a lot of kudos to our staff, our employees, our teachers across the district. We've been meeting those 70% criteria on our wellness to keep us down to that 2.5% increase. When we stop meeting those wellness criteria, then Select Health comes back and says, you're not meeting your wellness criteria, you're not doing your part of the deal, we're going to raise our prices. So a big thank you to all of our employees for that. We do have about 900,000 plus the 400,000 from that truth and taxation, so intact for their annual replacement. We have about 950 that we set aside, 950,000 that we set aside 2 years ago, right before COVID, for safety and security. We had some extra money in our undesignated funds, and as a board, you decided to commit it towards safety and security. That is still there because our focus this year has obviously been on safety and security related to COVID, and it's taken up most of the time with safety committees. So safety committee still has some money sitting there in order to go out and do some bigger projects in the next couple of years that came out of that security audit. That money's still there. It's still waiting for them. It's assigned for that use. We always have some minor utility increases. This year, utilities are down a little bit because we had several months at the end of the year, at the beginning of the year, where we weren't in school as much. Our hours were shorter. We weren't in there an extra day. So right now, our utilities, just based on usage, are down. That won't continue once we're back in full. So we usually do a small increase in utilities. 5-year assumptions, a little more long-term planning. We always take a look at what is transportation going to need in bus replacements, IT and curriculum replacements, those types of things. Just things that we always have to keep in mind when we're planning and budgeting. And then we do some 10-year assumptions, just saying, okay, make sure you've got some fund balances setting aside in case inflation on medical jumps or rates go up. Just, it's always good to say, be smart, be wise, have some fund balance. Don't necessarily spend 100% of your funds, which is why we try to do the 500,000 to the good each year. And we've been meeting that plus some. Some of that's just, like this year, we've had a lot of savings in supplies. We'll probably end this year to the good because with COVID, so many expenditures changed. We haven't spent, we've only spent like $40,000 on travel this year, whereas we usually spend over $500,000 right now. So we're saving money on travel, we're saving a little bit of money on supplies because kids weren't in school as much. Not that we want to, but I guess if there's a silver lining to COVID, it ultimately, in those respects, saved us some money. In other respects, it cost us a lot of money, but we've been federally funded for some of that, which I will cover at the end.
Can you go back just, I just want to maybe Chad can say. We talked about the annual request of 900,000 plus the 400,000 for tech replacement.
900,000 includes teacher, staff, and other replacements, and then the 400,000 is actually AV. That's to get up AV into some sort of a replacement cycle. We've never had AV on any. We talk AV, we're talking cafeteriatoriums, we're talking about classrooms, we're talking about TVs and all that kind of stuff.
And that's
Marquees, all of that's included in that.
Okay, I just want to make sure that with our higher usage, is there still enough money?
Yes.
Okay.
So that does bring us to the next slide. Hello. Oh, my battery's running well. That's awesome. Let me grab my cord real quick. I don't know why it's low when it's been plugged in already.
Well, obviously Chad's fault.
Maybe this cable's not plugged in. Yeah. I don't know if there's any. Oh. Oops. Okay, hopefully that takes care of my battery problem. Okay, so that takes us to this next slide, which is usually the main thing we talk about in this today in this conversation.
I'd say it's working.
Wow. Hey, Chad.
See, I should have said my name, and it's like.
Okay. I've been having some problems with my computer, and of course it's going to act up today. So these are the ongoing requests that we have for this next fiscal year. These are the things that we're kind of looking to you as a board to say, yes, we like the direction you're taking. We're comfortable with those dollar amounts and what the uses are. Again, I kind of start with a base budget, and in the base budget, I will always start with steps and a 1% for. Bonnie, you may end up having to do this. Steps are 1% for employees. So steps for all of our employees cost about $1.8 million right now, and a 1% budget of about 2.9 million for salary increases going into next fiscal year. Again, our medical inflation's being held at about 2.5% increase. The district pays 80% of that. The employees pay 20%, so the district portion is about $250,000.
We're on our last year of the 2.5, right?
We are, however, we do have.
We were offered a renewal for the 2.5 for the next 3 years if we meet our goals. So this is actually next year's beginning year 1 of the 2.5. So
That's good news. That's really good news.
yeah, it's a great thing, and I mean, right now, coming in at that low is a really good thing. We have to continue to meet the goals of having at least 70% of our employees participate in the wellness program and meet their goals. So, but we've been able to do that, and we're going to continue onward, I think.
So hopefully we won't see that increase too much, but you know, there obviously is that possibility that at some point it's going to spike back up again. You know, and that's where the insurance committee comes in. The insurance committee will have to take a look at it and say, do we make changes to our policy? Do we push towards more of a health savings type insurance? That's what the insurance committee does when they're gathering, and that has representation from both PEA, ESP, Jason and I. So that's a good committee that we would have each year. We do have, speaking of wellness, a small ask of $11,000 to increase there for some salaries. We have found out that the work for some of those people in that area is a little bit heavier than it was expected, so HR is asking for a very small increase to cover a small increase in salaries. Curriculum continues to be a challenge. We've had $750,000 in that budget rotating for the last 5 years since that truth in taxation. Some years Anne Marie's group will use 450 of it. We carry over the other 300, and that next year she might spend $1 million. I'm probably on either end of the spectrum there, but so with $750,000 a year allowed to roll over, it's been able to sustain her in her purchases. The state is changing some of the ways that they're addressing curriculum. Is that correct?
They're changing, well, they have changed their standards revision process, which drives our curriculum process.
Okay, so the standards are changing, therefore curriculum is changing. Anne Marie is faced with the cost of curriculum going up. She's probably closer to $1.5 to $2 million a year as the true need. We're asking for next year to add $200,000 to that budget. We've been able to find where we can fund a little bit more of that out of some other places, at least for 1 year. So going in FY22, we're asking to add $200,000 to that budget ongoing, but with the caveat that there's probably a good chance when I'm standing up here next year, we'll probably be asking for a little bit more than that. We've managed to, with some rollers she's got, with a chunk of money that Keith has that he doesn't consistently use, we can cover probably another $300,000 to $400,000 internally without asking for that yet. So we're only going to ask for what we need this year, and we'll probably be back next year to maybe touch base and see where we're at and we may have to ask for more. And then, as you saw on the last slide, we're asking to add $400,000 out of our capital levy to cover some more AV and security camera needs. That is the one place that Chad's struggling with having rotating budget to cover. He's great. He's got enough money to cover his Chromebooks, teacher replacement, employer replacement. He's got a pretty good plan set aside to keep those covered and keep that consistent replacement cycle. It's just this one piece that's lacking. So that would just require me internally to shift a little bit of your board voted local leeways over in capital when I set the rates in June. It will take away a little bit from our operating, but we will manage it. And then we've got this very large $2 million item here. And again, I'll get into the CARES money a little bit more in depth at the very end of this, but we're planning on, because we really don't know what's going to happen with enrollment. We know our enrollment's dropped off. We know if our enrollment stays there, we are FTE heavy. We have more teachers than we need. However, we don't know if we're going to get those kids back. We don't want to let attrition happen and not have enough teachers in the schools have all those kids come back and have classrooms of 32 kids because we didn't plan appropriately. Additionally, closing that learning gap and getting kids caught back up is probably going to require some extra work. So having extra teachers on staff for a year is probably a good management decision. So we're planning on using about $2 million of the second round of ESSER/CARES funds to cover keeping those FTEs for another year. It will have to be communicated that, you know, this is for a year, and a year from now, if our enrollment hasn't come back up, then at that point, we'll probably have to let some attrition happen, and school will have to start considering, you know, how they're gonna work with a little bit lower FTEs. But obviously, they'll have less kids, so it shouldn't be too bad. And typically, we have enough people leave every year that laying anybody off is not gonna be an issue. We'll be able to capture anything that we might need to capture through attrition. But, so we're asking to earmark $2 million of that CARES funding for that reason. So about $5.8 million in ongoing requests. The majority of that is salaries and that $2 million for continuing those FTEs. We've got some one-time funds. As I said, we've got the $950,000 in safety and security. It's there. I don't know if they'll be prepared to use it next year. That's probably going to depend on what happens with COVID, but they've got those funds there to do some of the things that came from that I don't know, do you call it an audit assessment that they did, the safety assessment?
Yeah, the threat assessment was
Threat assessment, thank you.
associated with those top strands we wrote.
And then if you recall, last year we made some changes to eSchool, which dropped our enrollment about 2,400 students, so we lost some WPU. WPU is always based on 2-year ADM from 2 years ago. So this current year we had a bit of a windfall, even though we don't have those students, we got the WPU for them. If you recall, we were holding back $1 million of that, $500,000 for this year, $500,000 for FY22 to help cover the cost of eSchool while they transition. So this next year, eSchool is going to have to start doing some work to say, what is eSchool really going to cost us? How do we transition from that change that the board made a year ago? And that's been set aside to fund balance as well. So how will we fund those $5.8 million in asks? Currently, the WPTU funding looks like it's going to be about 5.82%. That is about $2.7 million for our district if I hold enrollment flat. The legislature does have a line item they're calling a hold harmless. I don't know exactly how they're going to calculate it or allocate it, but it is to protect school districts for those drops and fluctuations in enrollment that we felt this year. So I'm kind of basing my figures right now, again, these are early numbers, on the fact that we'll be protected and we'll get about the same amount in WPU. So about 2.7 million increase in WPU. Again, that basic rate freeze I was talking about earlier, we'll probably see about 500, 600,000 there. Growth, we usually again see about 600,000 in new property taxes from growth. And we are finally at a point, hallelujah, where we can start considering our OPEB sunsetting. The OPEB, which was done back in 2006, was the year I got here, 2006. It's a very large expense. It's about $3.3 million a year generally. There's about a $30 million liability on our books for this OPEB.
Can you tell me what OPEB is?
Other post-employment benefits. So what happened was in 2006, some new accounting rules came out that said, if you have all of these retirement costs associated with people who are going to retire, that's a liability and it should be on your books. So we had to make some changes because when you put that on your books, all of a sudden you've got this huge liability that you've got to be able to afford. And districts across the nation, other governmental entities across the nation had to look at what those benefits were going to cost. And at the time it was full medical for an employee and a spouse for the rest of their lives, which is a lot of money. So they had to look at what those long-term costs were going to be, and it was so extraordinarily high that everybody kind of adjusted and made these plans. Our plan said if you'd been here, I don't have the specifics in my head, but if you'd been here for 20, I think it was 20 years at the time, you would get 5 years of medical when you leave, plus a large lump sum stipend. If you'd been here another X number of years, 12 years, you're going to get lump sum, but you're not going to get the medical. So we've been funding that as people retire. So as people retire, we pay them that huge lump sum, and then for those 5 years they get medical, we're affording that medical. It's about $3.3 million a year. We're finally at a point, we put some fund balances aside because accounting required us to. We've got $14.8 million of earmarked fund balances for OPEB, and that's an accounting requirement. We're finally at a point where we can start posting some of those expenditures against that fund balance instead of as an annual expense. So we are going to start drawing down that fund balance about $500,000 a year for right now, which frees up $500,000 in our expenditures to help us fund some of these things.
This is a question, but is that why all the other districts there, OPEB is so much smaller than ours? I mean, we got pretty much one of the biggest groups, and we just start later, or we got older teachers? Or...
You know, I'd have to go back and look at, it might have been what kind of benefits we had to begin with, or Jason, I know.
We were offering really sweet.
We had some pretty rich
people
benefits.
were leaving,
Okay.
so that's a large part of that.
At the time, it was referred to as golden handcuffs.
Yep.
This is for people who got a lot of years in, and rather than losing them to another district, this would keep them, because they would lose it if they left.
And so now we just have those net pension liabilities, I mean, they're kind of the two separate things.
Yep.
So other
There's a
districts
liability,
use their
there's an
net pension
asset.
liabilities, and that's why their other
Yep.
districts have bigger net pension
Yep.
liabilities.
Yep.
OPEB.
And we don't actually, we have a fund balance earmarked to start paying some of those now that we've hit that sunset. And when I say sunset, we've hit kind of our top expenditures, and you're gonna start seeing it go like this. We still have 20 years to pay on it. We still have employees that are my age or younger that have 30 years in, that have this benefit, but they're so young they're not leaving yet. So, you know, it's 20 years down the road before a lot of these employees even retire. But we'll start seeing that slowly slope off. And then the $2 million for that FTE, I'm calling it an FTE hold harmless, we're going to take from CARES. So that's where the funding will come from to cover those. As you can see, the revenues are a little bit higher, which when we're talking about a base budget, looks like I just lost my battery. Which when we're talking about a base budget is important because we still have negotiations to do. So we've got some room for negotiations to take care of that. Does everybody have this open on their computers? I'm sorry, I don't know why my computer is not charging.
Someone over there was saying it's because you don't have an Apple.
Probably
Is that you,
true.
Todd? That's me.
Okay, so I'm just going to go over here Jennifer's shoulder, unfortunately.
What page was that on?
We are on slide 10. Okay, so moving down to slide 11, the long-term priorities. This goes back to replacement cycles and whatnot. 1.3 million for tech, that's the 900,000 we already have in the budget, plus the 400,000 that we are requesting to add. Annual curriculum, as I mentioned, long-term, we're looking at probably $1.5 to $2 million a year for annual curriculum. We're asking for 200,000 to get us in through this next year, and then we'll reevaluate where we're at and how much we may need to ask in the future. Bus replacements, we are caught up on bus replacements, and when I say caught up, we are at a point now where we can just we could go with a replacement cycle of about 2 buses a year. We will probably still do 3 because we have a grant that pays for half the bus. So while we can get that grant money to help us buy buses, we will. We were way behind on bus. Thank you. Way behind on bus purchases several years ago. We had to buy 4 at a time for a little while, then 3 at a time for a little while. Now we're finally at a point where we don't have 25-year-old buses in our city anymore. We're not paying for as many repairs and whatnot. So we still plan on at least 2 bus purchases a year. Tell me where you are. The computer's deciding that for me.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny.
Slide 11.
Okay, slide 11.
If you want to switch back to your computer on the touch screen, just switch back.
Let's just do it off the ears.
Can someone look for lunch for me?
What
slide are you on?
One more. Right there.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so about 130,000 from our general fund, that buys one bus, and then in our capital, Mark always has money for one bus out of capital because that is a capital, so we can charge some there. And then as you saw, Mark had about $5.2 million in capital improvements and projects going into next year. That is not including anything to do with Wasatch and Gibson. It doesn't include the possible roofing projects that he had slated in building reserve. That's just, his normal annual projects are usually 4 to 5 million. So we've got 5.2 million there. Next slide. Yes?
Could we have Anne-Marie just help us better understand how the annual curriculum cost is about doubled?
Sure. So liken the curriculum industry to the newspaper industry. It used to be you primarily paid for physical paper. It's all moving to digital subscription now. So we're not buying, it's not like you can get a set of textbooks and say, oh, we're going to use these for 16 years. It's you're buying a subscription every year. The state cycle is a 7-year cycle. We can only buy curriculum subscriptions for 5 years. So every year we're addressing a new curricular item. So the state changes the standards. Like in the upcoming years, it's going to be K-12 literacy. So that we need to look at all of our K-12 ELA, English language arts options. And instead of buying books, kind of flipped it on us. That now you buy the subscription and you get access to all their digital things, which are great. You know, like for instance, our digital subscription for secondary ELA content is updated every week with, they have partnerships with Time Magazine and New York Times, and so they're constantly really putting updated new things in it. But it's not just that same textbook that is used for 20 years, it's those subscriptions.
Is there some classes that still have to use books?
Yeah, so what they do now is typically they say they throw in the books. So you get digital subscriptions and then they'll give you either a hardbound textbook and maybe a consumable to go along with it. But this year, it's really benefited us having our primary platform be the digital one. Teachers may use the hardbound textbooks in some cases for certain situations, and then again, we get a subscription of any consumables, like workbooks that may come with it. But they're considered the add-ons, where in the past it used to be you'd buy books and they'd throw in any technology that went with it. But now being subscription-based, if we want to keep providing curriculum for our teachers, which I think we have an obligation to, that this is the new industry, yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, a couple more long-term capital needs. We talked earlier about the qualified school construction bond that was used to build Provo Peaks. It was about $6.4 million. That is a lease revenue bond, and what you do with lease revenue bonds is the district makes a payment into a sinking fund every year instead of actually to the bond. And at the maturity date, it's like a savings account. At the maturity date, that savings account pays off the bond. So we're still putting about $500,000 a year into that. So when we look at long-term capital needs, that capital balance that we were talking about that Mark has, $4 million of that is basically earmarked to pay that bond off. So when we start talking about using capital funds for possibly funding part of the building, those are some of the things we have to take into consideration as we've got that debt coming due. We've made the payments. It's a $500,000 expenditure each year, but then we're holding it in fund balance that's got to be paid out. And then obviously we have budgeted bond expenditures, as Mark showed you, for next year of about $28 million. So, which will always kind of skew some of our numbers. When I bring you financial numbers like I did with that chart at the beginning, it was a little, salaries were a little skewed because we had bond numbers in there. So those are things we have to keep in mind. But again, not including anything on Dixon or Wasatch in these scenarios, just because we, you know, as the last conversation came to fruition, we really don't know what direction is best to go yet. Okay, next slide. So in summary, there are your, at the top, how we're going to make some budget changes and pay for these budget requests. And then the bottom half, just a summary of what the asks are. Before I go on to the next few slides, which are more CARES and ESSER funding type things, what we want to know, and this is just high level, is the board comfortable with these requests? Is there something we're missing that you'd like to see happen? You know, you obviously had good questions about curriculum and tech and what that money is going to be used for. Those are a couple of big ticket items that are on there. Salaries are always a discussion, and medical inflation you just can't get away from. So it's kind of where we're at on our request for next year. Okay, so I thought while I had a minute, next slide please. Go ahead, one more. I thought I would just review real quickly because we are getting so much money in CARES, and we're always talking about we'll pay for that in CARES, we'll pay for that in CARES, we'll pay for that in CARES. The first round of what everybody's calling is from the CARES Act, so everybody calls it CARES money, ESSER and CARES funding. I just wanted to outlay what our main expenditures were. We have $2,057,000 provided to us in the first round of ESSER funds, and those are the larger ticket items that we spent that money on or have earmarked that money. Most of it's spent. We still have a little bit that we know we earmarked, but we haven't actually paid the bill yet, but most of the $2 million's gone. And as you can see, a lot of it went to PPE. A large amount of it went to student devices. We had those 12 hours of teacher PD for training on, I think it was Canvas before the school year started. That obviously took up a large portion of that. Cleaning and disinfecting increase in costs. We had some increase in e-school needs because we had a shift of kids going over there. We need more teachers over there, so we've earmarked some of that to help pay for some of our e-school costs. We had an increase in nurse needs. We actually contracted with the county to bring in, what did we do, Doug, an extra 40 hours of nurses total?
I think we ended up doing 10 for 2 different employees.
Okay, so 20 hours a week above and beyond, above what we normally do for nursing needs.
Is this all in dollars?
Yes.
Okay.
I could put it in pesos if you want.
No, my husband's British, so it's not
okay.
dollars, it's in pounds.
Okay. Yeah, we operate in dollars at the district, so yes, it's in dollars. Some increased staffing, classroom cameras. As you remember, you had a large purchase request a while back for classroom cameras. We coded about $160,000 of that purchase to the ESSER. You'll see below a small amount of that went to the GEARS funding, which was that governmental funding from the governor. We had $665,000 of GEARS, which was the 10% holdback that the governor had that he was at his discretion to divvy out. He sent a portion of that to school districts. We are hanging on to about $150,000 of that right now to add to our summer school needs, probably mostly from the SPED and at-risk area, because that's what GEARS was for, was SPED and at-risk. SPED had about $300,000 in various needs there that we've used that money for. We used it to help us with some of our social worker costs this year. Some of these things are things that we normally have expenditures for, but we justified putting towards these funds because of COVID. That's what those people's focus became. Next slide. Okay, on this slide, this is the second round of ESSER funds. So this is the one that came out in January, and it's about 4 times what we got the first round. So we got $8.6 million. This money we have until September of 2022 to spend. So we will be able to spend, and probably will need to spend most of it in fiscal year 22, but we can spend some of it at the very beginning of fiscal year 23. The feds actually tacked on another year to that, but our state legislature cut it off at September 2022. So which is probably okay, because hopefully COVID will be done and over with and we won't need it anymore. But we're going to repeat some of those costs that I just covered from the first round, probably about $800,000 worth of those costs, because we know we're going to need PPE again, we know we're going to have to continue to clean schools, we know we're going to have some of the needs that we had in that $2 million. So we've got about $800,000 of the first ESSER round and about $480,000, that's mostly the SPED needs of the social workers, that we'll cover again next year that we had from the first round. We're still working through summer school planning. We don't know exactly what it's gonna look like or exactly how much it's gonna cost. These are kind of high-level numbers right now. We've earmarked a total of $1 million for 2 years of summer school. We're assuming the first year probably, maybe we'll have more attendance. Those numbers could change. We may not need that much. We will have to cover transportation and child nutrition out of that money because child nutrition doesn't pay for those kinds of monies. Federal funding doesn't pay for it. State transportation is not going to pay for it. They will in the Title Ones. For her normal summer school programs that she usually does, she'll still run those. But any additional meals that we'll need to do, if we have other locations open, we'll have to pay for it out of our funds. And we'll pay for any transportation needs out of that as well.
On the previous page, it said social workers about $180,000. I've heard so much positive feedback from having social workers there more. Is that going to go away once this funding goes away?
No, that was actually built into our budget elsewhere. So once this funding's gone away, we're able to kind of, and you'll see this in the next category, we're able to kind of take some of what we do. I mean, obviously a lot of what we do anyway. COVID didn't change it, it just changed the way we do it. So we're able to say, because of COVID, we can justify putting this money against this CARES package, which is going to free up some money in our regular budgets for other things. Which
Sponging it and then putting it over here for when we need
shell game. We're playing a shell game. A legitimate, justified shell game.
I was gonna say.
Yes. Yes. You know me, I wouldn't.
Let's put that on the camera.
Hopefully you guys know that about me by now. But that's what this next section is, the shift in transportation, shift in some HR, online teachers, custodial salaries, some other tech COVID-related costs, and maintenance. I mean, we've seen a huge change in the way some of these people have had to do their jobs because of COVID. There's extra expenditures with supplies because of COVID. Maybe people are working some extra hours because of COVID. So the way that the allowable costs are written on this CARES funding allows us to shift some of our regular costs over into that. So we will shift, and this is going to be actually in this fiscal year, we'll shift about 1.6 million of those regular costs over to that 8.6 million.
Do you think, I mean, we haven't come up with the summer school plan yet.
We're working through that. I think that's on the agenda today.
We'll talk about it this
So we don't think we'll need an extra 1.5 million to put into summer school.
I don't, you know.
And still get all our kids who have fallen behind over the last year caught up.
Right. It's hard to say because we are still kind of in planning stages. We don't know exactly what it costs. I mean, you can see I've got this number down here as a holdover.
Yeah.
For FY23, because we can use July, August, and September of the very next fiscal year for some of this money. We probably aren't going to need that much for next year. Again, these are kind of high-level numbers because we don't know where we're going with COVID right now, but just kind of earmarking right now. We can always.
As long as our priority is catching those kids up.
Yeah.
And if we can do it.
And we're okay to hold over some money?
Yeah. Yeah. The worst thing that's going to happen if we don't spend it is we don't put in for reimbursement, and they will ask us why we didn't use it. You know, Devin, my accounting director, wants us to use it all because there's a new rule that says if you don't spend all your money, we're going to come audit you. It's kind of backwards of what audits usually are. Usually audits are the other way around, but so she doesn't want to just trigger an audit because we don't spend it, but in reality, if we can't spend it, we can't spend it. But I think as we get deeper into this next phase of COVID, we're going to find where we can use this money. And again, we have the ability to make some shifts. So anyway, that second grouping is about 1.6 million in shifts, which I will get to in a moment what we think we use those funds for. And then just some small other amounts, some other money, some curriculum for social, emotional, resilient youth. Doug, I think that was yours, right?
Yes.
Homebound student support for teachers. We talked about possibly doing some stipends there. We don't know if we're going to do it or not, but it's on the table. We did hire a handful of positions this year to the tune of about $340,000. They were hired as temporary positions. Some of them were sped. But because we have this money, we have the ability to fund those positions for one more year, and we feel it's important to keep those positions to help us through this learning gap that we've got to achieve, that we've got to get past. So we'll continue to carry some of those. And And then there's that $2 million that I showed where we'll cover our FTEs that we're going to continue to carry. So just, that's kind of where this, you know, it's a lot of money. I thought you as the board should know what our kind of plans are for using that money and what we've used it for to date. In case you're asked out in the community, what are you doing with all these ESSER funds? Any questions on that?
Kind of a specific question maybe for Doug. 15,000, I do a lot with SEL curriculum. That seems really low for a whole district. Is that, is money being pulled somewhere else?
Yeah, it's not the only funding that we have access to for that SEL curriculum. We have an MTSS grant that we can oversee that Alex and our team has been working on. We just have, we're not just, you know, buying it for everyone. It's been based on the interest and the readiness to implement those things, other than just buying them and sitting them on the shelf and the teacher doesn't know what to do with it. So it's part of a slow and steady implementation of SEL curriculum in the schools as a tier 1. And so that's where we're at as far as this year and looking ahead to next year as to what our curriculum ask was. So it's hard for me to kind of say, send me hundreds of thousands of dollars of this curriculum if schools aren't at that spot where they have the readiness to implement them. But again, it's a little bit of a, we had a shortfall on what we had budgeted in the grant because there was such interest. I mean, one thing that COVID's done for us is it got more people thinking about SEL. And so we had more requests to the tune of about 15,000 for what we had a year ago put into the grant resource of the state. So that is the difference.
So it's resilient youth is specific to, I know seconds, I've used seconds, I find
Yeah,
that
that's correct.
But resilient youth.
Resilient youth is one that I think Todd can speak to this. I think this is the one that's used at Provo High School. I think through the
Provo High School is using White Tribe.
yeah, it's the White Tribe. It's a connected piece with Paul Calderon.
Yeah, strong teens. Strong teens is the other.
Oh.
The secondary schools are using White Tri or strong teens. Some of them are starting to move into second step.
Okay.
So I might have named that wrong.
No, you're fine.
Yeah.
One other question, the second step move, when I used it, it was all pictures, which was fine. Has it moved digital?
It has some digital components, right?
There are components of it, so yes, some of it is hard copy, but there are a lot that are.
They moved some of it to digital, but you can do it.
It's still more hard copy based, but it is moving more.
So like when the kids went, or in school, they could be like, it's flexible or something.
There is
like
some flexibility. It's not completely flexible, but.
No, but I mean, you have options, because I know that some SEL programs don't really, they haven't done the digital lead, but it's important, I think it's going to be important moving forward that we have that option to have some kind of digital.
And SEL is moving that direction. They're not as upfront up on that as some of those others that are purely open a web page, watch this little, image or this video, and then this one is built on what you experienced before. Very much being a prepared presentation that the teacher did in kind of a circle environment with the class, and that's primarily where it still happens, as opposed to everyone sitting back and watching the screen.
Okay, thank you.
Can I complain as a taxpayer for a second? So, I like what we're doing, it makes total sense. Man, they give us $8 million and we're just mainly using it to stick it into our normal thing, and then we're gonna move that money over here, so it's not mainly just a shell game to work.
So,
It's not really for COVID response. They felt like they had to.
That's less than a quarter.
let me say very carefully why I believe those shifts are for COVID response.
Okay.
First, like I said, a lot of people's jobs changed and they were doing a lot of different things related to COVID, so we can justify putting it there. And this conversation will go a little bit further in the executive session, but freeing up those funds in our regular operating is going to give us the opportunity to look at our teachers and our staff and be able to say, we've got some one-time money that we feel we can do something for you.
Okay.
So, without getting too into that, because it's probably more of an executive session discussion, that's kind of the general idea is free up some money, because they won't let us use CARES money for incentives. That's very clear. You can't say, we're thanking you all, we're giving you an extra $500.
Yeah.
We can't use it, it's an unallowable cost. So what we can do is justify the expenditures that we do have and allow us to have some extra funds to negotiate with.
And I wasn't criticizing.
No, I know.
I was just
No, I
saying-
see, you're right, from the perspective of the taxpayer.
And I'm sure every single district is doing this.
I would imagine imagine.
Because it makes sense, but,
Yep,
okay.
yep, you're right. So, yeah, so that was one part of this slide, is that freed up money is kind of part of our executive session discussion this afternoon as we start getting into the negotiation season. And then the last thing I just wanted to go over with you real quick, because you might be getting, I know some of you are getting questions from teachers and stuff around you. When are we going to get our stipend that the state's giving us? So we just got the notice on Monday. This week's been kind of crazy. This stipend thing has taken over HR and accounting's life this week. But on Monday, we finally got the notice from the state that they're making the allocation, and they gave us the dollar amount of that allocation. So we are now assured that the money's there and we can start working on it. So we're going to be trying to get that paid by March 19th to our employees. The state funded all teachers that are in classrooms and school support. The bill says exclusively in the schools. And then they outline that also is going to include transportation and child nutrition and custodial. So basically, the state funded us for the bulk of this stipend, $1,500 for teachers, $1,000 for support staff, and they covered transportation, child nutrition, all school teachers, paras. It's based on their FTE, so if they're a 0.5 FTE, they're going to get 0.5 of that $1,500 or that $1,000. It also, in the bill, says they had to be hired by December 1st. So if they were not hired by December 1st, the state is not going to fund us for them. And that overall is about $2.6 million. It's between the 1,000 and 15. They covered retirement and they covered payroll taxes, which we'd have to afford.
Just double checking, so what about like people who are not full-time employees, but like the 29-hour employees?
They'll be prorated.
They'll be prorated.
Yep, they'll be prorated. So Devin's going to go through that whole, how many hours have people worked, what's their average hours, and we'll prorate it based on that. The district, assuming that we get an approval from the board on March 9th for budget approval, the district intends to fund the remaining staff at $1,000. And any teachers or staff hired after December 1st, we feel like we should probably provide them something, so we think 50% of that stipend if you're hired after December 1st. Because they're still impacted, not for as long of a period of time, but they're still being impacted a little bit. So the district would like to fund the remaining staff at $1,000 and those people hired after December 1st at 50%. If they're teachers, we'll give them 50% of the $1,500. If they're support staff, we give them 50% of the $1,000. That will cost the district about, it's actually, after we had to refine the people a little bit, it's probably going to be closer to $150,000. Late yesterday afternoon, Devin and I were talking about a couple people that probably won't be funded by the state. So it'll probably be about $150,000 pending approval from the board at our next meeting.
Does that $150,000 come from this ESSER money? Or?
No, we can't do incentives out of ESSER money. So that'll have to be built into our budget. That's why I need to bring you a budget increase on March 9th.
We suck it out of ESSER.
Yeah.
We suck it out of ESSER. We just launder it a little bit.
We've got
Keep it a little
enough.
bit clean.
Most of you probably know that I'm conservative when I budget, Joe's conservative when he budgets. We always have a little bit of a buffer to help us in case there's something big that comes up. We can absorb $150,000 probably in that buffer. Or some of the other shifts that we've made out of the $2 million. So I'm not overly concerned with that being a budgetary concern, but it will need to come to you on board as a board for approval on March 9th. So if you're comfortable with that plot, and I don't know if Jason or Keith want to add any thoughts on, we had the discussions, the three of us, about how we felt this would be good to do for our employees. So any thoughts?
Well, it just, Melanie has seen and participated on a daily basis with the safety committee. The number of employees who attend that on a regular basis, the notion that we would leave them out, I think is the wrong thing to do. It doesn't acknowledge the fact that this has been very burdensome. Lots of nighttime calls, lots of off-hour things that have been going on related to this. So, yeah, we're trying to acknowledge the work of everyone in the district to some extent.
I mean, I could use an example in HR. I mean, I think most of you have gone on to the vaccination. HR has a couple people who have been working their tails off between vaccination clinics and testing high school and trying to set it up. And, I mean, just every department you go to.
6 a.m. testing in high school.
Yep, every department you go to, they're doing something different and something more, and there's been some type of impact. Some more than others. I mean, I'm not going to say there are a few that weren't impacted quite as highly, but, you know, it'd be pretty impossible to go through and pick and choose, so, and probably not very fair. So, if you're comfortable with that, we'll draft a budget approval for March 9th, which is before the payout will happen, and we can start working on that. Okay, that's my spiel for the day. Thank you. Appreciate your time. If you have questions, email me, let me know. Again, this is really high level. We'll bring you the more detailed, specific budgets in May, like we usually do, when Joe really gets into the depth for you. And then in June, you actually approve those budgets statutorily and approve the certified tax rates. Okay. Thanks for putting up with my computer. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you.
All right, really quickly, we're going to have Caleb do communications, and then we're going to break for lunch.
Somehow you only have 3 minutes, Caleb.
I won't even take that unless we have one part. Really, all we wanted to do here is update everybody and introduce my department to the 2 new board members and the other board members since we've had some changes. Back in September, so the board approved hiring a new social media marketing position for our department to help be able to focus a little more on things and do some new things. That position's not been hired. That's Elizabeth there on the end. This is her first full week, so she hasn't got too far into the job yet. But she'll be focusing on social media, school stories, just kind of the things that Shauna used to kind of do, but on a more detailed, in-depth basis, and adding other things there as well. Shauna's continuing working with the digital media stuff, the video, photography, graphic design. She works with the websites, especially at the district office level. All the departments coming with their updates, coordinating with Chad's website team. And then we have Amanda here, who is kind of the story writer. She's in the schools. She's working with writing the stories a lot. She'll work with Elizabeth a lot on coordinating with our content managers and running that program, and just really highlighting the things that are going on in our district. I think that's all we want to do, is let everybody know who everybody was.
Do you do anything, Caleb?
No, I focus more on the media. I work a lot with Jason and Doug with HR and Keith on the district level communication things. Obviously, crisis management stuff. I work with them a lot. I don't think I'm involved in whatever they're doing to some extent.
That's a good, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I maybe assumed too much in the end of what I did, so.
Maybe this isn't the time for it, but a lot of Spanish speaking, at least in my area. Is there a possibility we could, in the future, we don't have to discuss it now, but look at getting, particularly social media posts? I think that's where we see a lot of them. I'd love to have more in Spanish so that when I share it, my Spanish speakers will understand, because I find that I can't communicate with them,
It's kind
and
of
I don't speak Spanish.
added bonus to hiring Elizabeth.
Yeah, hablo español.
Oh, excellent.
So as we get her integrated and figuring out things, we're going to be able to up what we're able to do in Spanish. We do all our communications in Spanish. Sometimes we're able to use some of Doug's employees to translate it. Other times we have to use the automatic translator, but now within our department we can get better translations and more translations out.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And I know we're planning on March 26th, comprehensive communications report to the board. That's your second session.
So this is what I think we should do. We'll break for lunch, and we'll start up again at 12:20.